A billionaire on his knees, a broken clay pot, and a flower girl who walked through the wrong door at exactly the right moment. This is not a love story about perfection. This is a story about two people so thoroughly wrecked by loss that they forgot what it felt like to want something for themselves, until one cold November morning pulled them into the same room and refused to let them leave unchanged. If this story finds you tonight, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far it travels. Like, stay until the end, because the last 5 minutes will hit differently than anything you expect. The morning Ethan Calloway turned 32, he stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his 44th floor office and watched the city wake up without him. New York never actually slept. He knew that. He'd built enough of his empire on that truth. The red-eye conference calls, the after-midnight wire transfers, the 4 a.m. market movements that required someone to be awake and paying attention. For years he had been that someone. Sharp, present, relentless. The kind of man other men pointed to in rooms and said, quietly, "That's him." But that was before. Before Claire. Before the accident on the Queensboro Bridge on a Tuesday in March 3 years ago. When everything that made Ethan Calloway worth pointing at got rearranged into something he barely recognized. He pressed 2 fingers against the cold glass and watched a yellow cab cut off a delivery truck 6 blocks below. The driver of the truck laid on the horn. Even from up here, even through the triple-paned glass, he could feel the vibration of it, that raw, ugly burst of frustration from someone who had somewhere to be, and something in the way. He understood that feeling more than he wanted to admit. His assistant knocked twice and opened the door without waiting for an answer. Marcus had worked for him for 6 years and had learned, somewhere around year 2, that waiting for Ethan to say come in was an exercise in patience that served nobody. "You have the Harrington Group at 9, Marcus said, already moving toward the desk with a tablet in hand. Legal pushed the Meridian contract review to 11. Your daughter's school called. Not an emergency, they said to tell you that first, but her teacher wants a call back before end of day about the winter showcase." Ethan turned from the window. "What kind of showcase?" "The kind where kids make things, and parents show up." Marcus set the tablet on the desk. "I'm guessing." "Set up the call for 4. Ethan crossed toward his desk and pulled out his chair. The leather was cold. Everything in this office was always slightly too cold, and he'd never bothered to adjust the thermostat because Claire used to complain about it, and somehow he hadn't been able to bring himself to change it. 3 years later, the office was still 58 degrees, and he wore a heavier jacket than he needed to. Marcus was already halfway back to the door. "Coffee's coming, and the florals for the foundation gala are scheduled for delivery this morning. Third-party vendor. Hendricks arranged it before he left last month, probably showing up around 10. "Fine. You want me to deal with it?" "I said fine, Marcus." The door closed. Ethan sat in the cold leather chair and opened the Harrington file on his tablet without reading a single word of it. His eyes moved across the text the way eyes do when the brain has already decided it's somewhere else, processing shapes instead of meaning, going through motions. On the corner of his desk, half hidden behind a stack of manila folders, sat a clay pot about the size of a grapefruit. It was terracotta-colored, hand-thrown, badly lopsided on one side where the clay had been pulled unevenly. Claire had made it in a ceramics class she took the winter before she died. She'd signed up on a whim after seeing a flyer in a coffee shop, spent 6 Saturday mornings in a rented studio in Brooklyn, and come home that last day holding this pot with both hands and grinning like she'd just won something. "It's terrible," she'd said. "I love it so much." He'd put it on his desk at home. Then, after, he'd brought it here, to the office, because the house had become a place full of her things that he couldn't look at and couldn't move. And at least here the pot was the only thing of hers he had to manage. It sat there every day. He didn't look at it directly. He just knew it was there, the way you know a bruise is there without pressing it. The delivery came at 9:40, not 10. Ethan was still in the Harrington meeting, or rather, sitting in the conference room while 4 men from the Harrington Group talked at each other about leveraged buyouts while he nodded at intervals, when his phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, "Florist here, sending her up." He didn't respond. He put the phone face down and watched Richard Harrington draw a diagram on the whiteboard that was either a corporate restructure or a very ambitious river delta. Across the city, at the same moment, a woman named Lena Harper was standing in an elevator she should not have been standing in, holding a large arrangement of white anemones and eucalyptus wrapped in brown paper, reading the post-it note on the side of the box for the third time. Callaway Group, 44th floor, Suite 4402. She looked at the elevator panel. She had pressed 44. The doors had closed. The elevator was moving. So far, so logical. What was less logical was that she was in this elevator at all, in this building, making this delivery herself on a Tuesday morning when she had a shop to open and 2 custom wedding arrangements due by noon. The situation, as she would have explained it to her best friend Dana over the phone later, was a cascade of small disasters that had started the night before when her only part-time employee, a 23-year-old art student named Pedro, had called in sick with what he described as either a cold or existential dread, honestly hard to tell. Pedro handled most of her deliveries. Without Pedro, Lena handled them herself, which meant reorganizing her entire morning around a schedule that was already running on fumes and optimism. The Callaway Group delivery had been arranged by someone named Hendricks through a standard corporate account. Weekly florals for a charitable foundation, standing order, good money. It was, if she was being honest, one of the 3 contracts keeping her shop afloat right now. She could not be late. She could not send the wrong arrangement. She had triple-checked the order before leaving. White anemones, eucalyptus, Dusty Miller, the whole thing dressed down and elegant the way corporate lobbies liked. The elevator opened on 44. Lena stepped out into a corridor that was all dark wood paneling and low lighting and the kind of aggressive quiet that costs a lot of money to maintain. There was no reception desk immediately visible, just a hallway that split in 2 directions, marked with small brass plaques she had to lean in to read. Left, 4,401 to 4,408. She went left. Found 4,402. Knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time, because she was holding 12 pounds of flowers and her left arm was starting to disagree with the arrangement. The door opened. Not to a law office, not to a receptionist's desk or a waiting room or any of the things a Suite 4402 in a corporate building was supposed to contain. The door opened directly into what appeared to be a very large, very private office. Dark wood desk, city view, a conference table to the right, and in the middle of the floor, not at the desk, not at the conference table, but on the actual floor with his back against the desk and his knees bent and his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, sat a man. He was holding something in both hands. She could see, even from the doorway, that whatever it was had broken. There were pieces of it on the floor around him. His head was bent over them. His shoulders were doing something complicated. Lena stood in the doorway with her arms full of flowers and said, before she could think better of it, "I'm so sorry. I think I have the wrong room." The man looked up. He had dark circles under his eyes that suggested either a very long night or a very long year. His jaw was unshaven in the careless way that wasn't a style choice. He was, she registered, in the same automatic way you register that someone is tall or that the sky is overcast, extremely good-looking, but in the specific way that very sad people sometimes are, where the sadness does something to the features that makes you want to look longer than is polite. He looked at her, then at the flowers, then back at her. "Suite 4402, she said, because something needed to be said and her brain had offered that as the safest option. "I'm looking for the Callaway Group. I have a standing—" "This is 4402, he said. His voice was low and slightly rough, the way voices get when they haven't been used much that morning. "Callaway Group is 4404. Different floor." She looked at the number on the door she'd pushed open. 4402. Looked at her post-it. 4404. "I misread," she said. "I'm so sorry, I'll—" She started to back out. "It's fine." He hadn't moved from the floor. He was still holding the pieces of whatever had broken. "You can go down the hall. 4404. She should have gone. Every reasonable instinct pointed toward going. She had 12 pounds of flowers and a schedule and a life that needed her to leave this room immediately. Instead, she looked at what he was holding. It was a clay pot, or had been. Maybe 6, 7 pieces of it now, scattered across the hardwood floor around him. Terracotta-colored, small, the kind of thing that would have been slightly lopsided even before it broke. "Did you drop it?" she asked. Something moved across his face. Not quite a wince, something quieter than that. It fell off the desk. He looked down at the pieces again. Shelf bracket gave out. "I've been meaning to fix it for—" He stopped. "It doesn't matter. Can it be repaired?" He looked up at her again. The question seemed to land differently than she'd intended, like she'd said something in a language he recognized but hadn't heard in a while. "I don't know," he said. "Probably not the way it was." Lena shifted the weight of the flowers to her other arm and looked at the broken pieces on the floor. She had grown up in a flower shop. She knew a lot about things that had been cut at the stem and were still technically alive. She also knew, from watching her mother work for 30 years, that broken things had a particular grammar. Some of them wanted to be thrown away, and some of them wanted to be put back together, and you could usually tell which was which. By the way, the person holding them was breathing. This man was holding those pieces very carefully. "There's a technique," she said. "Japanese. Kintsugi. You repair the breaks with gold. The idea is that the broken places become part of what makes the thing valuable." She paused. "I don't know why I said that. I'm sorry. I'll go." "Kintsugi." He said the word like he was tasting it. "I've heard of it. My mom used to talk about it. She wasn't Japanese. She just liked the idea that something could be more honest after it broke than it was before." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That sounds like something someone says when they're trying to feel better about something being broken." "Yeah," she said. "It does. It also happens to be true." Another silence. Outside, 44 floors below, the city continued its noise. He got up from the floor slowly, with the careful movement of someone whose body had been in one position longer than comfortable. He was tall. She hadn't registered how tall until he was standing, still holding the pieces in both hands. "I'm Ethan," he said. "I know," she said. "I mean, Callaway Group. I've been making deliveries here for a month." She shifted the flowers again. "I'm Lena. Harper. Lena Harper." He nodded, looking at her the way people look when they're trying to slot a new piece of information into a picture that already exists in their head. "The flower shop," he said. "Harper and Bloom. It was my mother's. I run it now." She glanced down at the arrangement in her arms. "I should get these to 4404. Your neighbor's probably wondering." "It's a law firm," he said. "They're not wondering. They have a lot of things to think about." Despite herself, she almost smiled. "Almost." "I'll go," she said. "Yeah." He looked down at the clay pieces in his hands. "Lena." She stopped. "Thank you," he said. "For the thing about the gold." She looked at him standing there in his expensive shirt with his sleeves rolled up, holding a broken pot with the particular carefulness of someone trying not to lose more of it than was already lost. "I hope you can fix it," she said. And then she went down the hall to 4404, delivered the flowers to a receptionist who barely looked up from her computer, and rode the elevator back down to the lobby, where the city noise hit her all at once through the revolving doors. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment before going to her van. She didn't know why the image stayed with her. A man on the floor of his office, holding broken pieces of something small, in the middle of what was clearly a very large and important life. She pushed it away. She had a shop to open and 2 wedding arrangements due by noon. Boom. She thought about it again at 11:15 while she was stripping the lower leaves off a bundle of garden roses and half listening to the radio above her work table. Then at 2, when a woman came in asking for something not too much just for a Tuesday, and Lena made her a small bunch of ranunculus and mint and tissue-thin anemones that looked exactly like something you'd buy for yourself to make a Tuesday feel less like what it was. The woman paid and said, "You have a gift for this." "My mother did," Lena said. "I just learned from watching." The woman left. Lena swept the cut stems into the bin and thought, briefly and without any particular reason, about the word kintsugi, and about a man who had said probably not the way it was with the particular flatness of someone who had made peace with a specific kind of loss. She told herself it was nothing. She was 30 years old and practical and deeply aware of the math of her life. The shop's rent was 3 months behind before the Callaway contract came in. She had $1,200 in her personal account, and her car made a sound on left turns that she was actively choosing not to investigate. She did not have the bandwidth for whatever emotion was trying to wedge itself into the story of a man she'd spoken to for 4 minutes in a wrong-floor hallway. She was still telling herself that at 7:30, when she locked up the shop and drove home through the November dark, the city lights blearing in the light rain that had started around 5 machadas. The call came 2 days later. It came to the shop number, which almost nobody used anymore. Most orders came through the website or Instagram. Lena was in the back room wrestling a bucket of stargazer lilies into a cold case when she heard the landline ring and scrambled for it, expecting a wholesale supplier, a wedding client, or a wrong number. Harper and Bloom. Lena Harper? She didn't recognize the voice at first. It was different on the phone than it had been in that office, more controlled. The roughness she'd heard that morning filed away into something professional. Yes? It's Ethan Callaway. A beat. I wanted to call myself rather than have someone from my office do it. She set down the lilies. Okay. I'm reaching out because my foundation, the Callaway Foundation, is approaching a significant expansion of our community development work, and we're planning a full gala event for March. We've been working with event florists in the past, but I've been told the arrangement we have isn't working well, and I'm looking to establish a direct partnership with someone. He paused. I looked at your portfolio online. You do exceptional work. Lena blinked. She had a portfolio online, yes. It was a website she'd built herself on a free platform, with photos she'd taken on her phone under various lighting conditions, some of them slightly out of focus. The work was good. She knew her work was good, but exceptional was a word she hadn't heard attached to it before by someone who wasn't Dana or her mother's old friend Vera. Thank you, she said, because it was the most neutral response available. I'm proposing a weekly contract for floral arrangements across 3 foundation locations, plus design work for the March Gala. I can have Marcus send over the terms. The rate is... He said a number. Lena sat down on the stool she kept next to the cold case. The number he'd said was almost exactly what she needed to cover the 3 months of back rent and still have money left over. It was not a coincidence. It was the amount she needed, as if someone had looked at her books and reverse-engineered generosity into the appearance of a fair rate. She knew she should feel grateful. She did feel grateful. She also felt something prickling at the edges of that gratitude that she wasn't sure what to do with. Mr. Callaway. Ethan. Ethan. The name felt strange in her mouth, too familiar for where they were. I appreciate this, and the rate is very fair. I want to ask you something directly, and I'd like you to answer me directly. A slight pause. All right. Is this because of Tuesday? Because I walked into your office and you felt like you owed me something? She kept her voice level. Because I don't need charity. The pause that followed was longer. No, he said. Then, I looked at your portfolio on Wednesday. I looked at it for about 40 minutes. The work you did for the Abelson wedding last spring, the table arrangements with the wild grasses and the old-growth roses, that's not charity. That's someone who understands what flowers are supposed to do in a room. She was quiet. If you want to talk about Tuesday, he continued, I'd tell you that your comment about kintsugi was the first useful thing anyone had said to me in about 3 months, which is separate from this conversation. Another pause. But I don't mix things up like that. The contract is the contract. Lena looked at the bucket of stargazer lilies she'd set on the floor, their heavy pink heads drooping slightly toward the drain. Send me the terms, she said. I'll look at them tonight. Good. A beat. How's the shop? It was a small question, casually placed. The kind of thing people say as they're wrapping up a phone call. She almost answered it the automatic way. Fine, thanks, busy. But something stopped her. It's November, she said instead. November is always hard. Flower shops have Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, graduation season, wedding season, and then a long stretch where people don't buy flowers because they're saving up for Christmas. We survived November. Do you? He said. It didn't sound like a test. It sounded like a genuine question from someone who was paying attention. Every year so far, she said. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Lena. She hung up and sat in the back room of the shop for a long moment with the lilies on the floor and the rain against the back window, and the feeling, annoying and persistent, that something had just shifted very slightly in the arrangement of her life. She signed the contract on Friday. The terms were, as promised, fair. More than fair. She read the fine print twice, forwarded it to her friend Dana, who had a minor in business and a major in suspicion, and got a text back 40 minutes later that said, "This is clean." Who is this man? A client, Lena typed back. A client who pays 4 times market rate, lol. It's a fair rate for the scope of work, she typed, which was technically true and also completely beside Dana's point. She signed and sent it back and spent the rest of Friday evening making a list of everything she would need to source for the foundation's December arrangements. White hellebores were going to be a problem. She'd need to call Marcus and confirm the timeline. She should probably visit the 3 locations first to understand the light and the scale of the spaces. Professional. Organized. That was how this worked. She told herself that about 12 times over the weekend, and by Monday morning she almost believed it. The first delivery to the foundation's main building was on a Wednesday, 2 weeks into December, when New York had committed fully to winter, and the cold came with an edge that meant business. Lena loaded her van at 6:30 and drove downtown with the heat on full and a travel mug of coffee wedged between her thigh and the door because the cup holder had been broken since 2021. The foundation's main building was a converted townhouse on the Upper West Side. 3 stories of beautifully maintained brick with a garden gate and a staff of about 20, most of whom, Lena noticed, had the particular look of people who had chosen their work carefully and meant it. A woman named Sandra at the front desk signed for the flowers and then said without transition, "He wants to know if you have time to see the room." Lena set down the second box of arrangements. "What room?" "The design studio, 3rd floor." Sandra said it with the tone of someone who had been asked to say something that felt slightly odd to say. "Mr. Calloway mentioned it. He said he'd like your opinion on the space before the gala planning begins. He's not in today, but he said if you had time, you could look." Lena looked at Sandra. Sandra looked back with the carefully neutral expression of someone who had learned not to editorialize about her employer's decisions. "Sure," Lena said. The 3rd floor studio had 3 tall windows facing north, which was excellent light for design work, even shadowless, steady. There was a long work table made of reclaimed wood, a wall of pegboard for tools, a utility sink in one corner. Everything was clean and ordered and slightly dusty, the way rooms get when they've been prepared and then left waiting. On the work table, set apart from everything else, was a small terracotta clay pot. Not broken anymore. Almost. The repairs were visible, thin gold lines running through the cracks, following the breaks exactly, catching the north light through the windows with a quiet gleam. Whoever had done it, and she suspected she knew who had arranged for it, if not who had actually done the work, had not tried to hide the damage. The gold sat right there in the surface of it, honest, a little rough at the edges, every crack accounted for. Beside it, there was a note. Just a note card, folded once. She picked it up. "Thank you for what you said." Lena stood in the studio for a long moment with the note card in one hand and the north light coming through the windows and the city humming 40 feet below. She was a practical woman. She had learned practicality from necessity, the way most people do. From watching her mother make $50 stretch into $75, from closing the shop early on slow nights to save electricity, from learning that optimism without a plan was just wishing with better posture. She was practical, and she was careful, and she was very aware of the gap between her life and the life of the man whose name was on the foundation and the building and the contract she'd signed. And she was standing in a room with a repaired pot, and the gold lines in the cracks were catching the light, and she was thinking about what he'd said. Probably not the way it was. Different, she thought, not lesser. She set the note card back on the table. She took out her phone and photographed the room from several angles: the windows, the work table, the light at this hour, because she was a professional, and she had a gala to design for, and that was what she was here for. Then she went back downstairs, loaded her empty boxes into the van, and drove back uptown with the coffee cold in the broken cup holder and the gold-threaded pot in her mind the whole way home. She met his daughter 3 weeks later. It happened at the Foundation building on a Thursday afternoon in mid-December that had started to snow around 2 o'clock. Real snow, the kind with intention, not the half-hearted flurries that passed for weather in early winter. Lena was adjusting the week's arrangements in the lobby when she heard footsteps on the stairs and then a voice, small and precise, saying, "Those ones are the white ones." She turned. A girl, maybe 7, stood at the bottom of the stairs with a backpack shaped like a fox. She was looking at the arrangement on the entry table with the particular focused attention of a child who was genuinely interested in the thing she was looking at, not just making conversation. "They are," Lena said. "Do you know what kind?" The girl came closer. She studied the flowers. "Not roses. The petals are different. Anemones. You can tell by the dark center. See? And the way the petals are soft all the way to the edge. No curl." The girl leaned in and looked at the dark center of the nearest bloom with an expression that suggested she was filing this information away in a system she trusted. "I'm Sophie," the girl said. "I'm Lena. You brought the flowers." "Every week. My dad says you make them." Sophie straightened up and looked at her with eyes that were unsettling in their directness. Dark brown, very clear, the kind of eyes that made adults feel they were being assessed rather than observed. "He said you understand what flowers are supposed to do in a room." Lena was quiet for a moment, recognizing those words. "He said that?" "He says it when he's trying to explain why he likes something," Sophie said, with the matter-of-fact tone of a child describing a parent's habit. "He says it a lot about the flowers. He doesn't say it about other stuff that much." Before Lena could find something appropriate to say to that, Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked, she noticed this in the same clinical, involuntary way she noticed light quality, different in this building than he had in the corporate office. Less armored, maybe. He was wearing a dark sweater instead of a suit jacket, and he had the expression of a man who'd been working but hadn't hated it. "Sophie," he said, coming down the stairs. "I told you to wait upstairs." "I was waiting. I was also talking to Lena." He looked at Lena. There was something in his face, a flicker of something unguarded, quickly managed, that she catalogued and then deliberately set aside. "She was explaining anemones," Lena said. "She explained them to me," Sophie said. "The dark center means they're anemones, and the petals go soft all the way to the edge." "Did you know that?" Lena asked him. "I didn't," he said. "I know now." Sophie had already moved back to the arrangement, examining a spray of dusty Miller with her nose approximately 3 inches from the leaves. Ethan came to stand beside Lena, not quite close, the way people stand when they're maintaining a sensible distance, and are both aware of the sensible distance being maintained. "She likes flowers," he said quietly. "She always has. Claire, her mother," a pause. "Claire had a garden on the roof of the house in Brooklyn where we lived before." He stopped again. Sophie doesn't remember it much. She was 4. Lena kept her eyes on Sophie. "She remembers something," she said. "She's looking at those flowers like she's trying to remember the name of something she already knows." He looked at his daughter. He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe." Sophie turned around. "Can I come see where you make them sometime?" she asked Lena. "The flowers, your shop." Lena looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Lena. It was, she thought, the kind of question that required a parent's permission and a stranger's willingness and a complete absence of any practical reason to say yes. "That's up to your dad," Lena said. Sophie turned to her father with the expression of someone who considered the outcome already decided and was merely waiting for the paperwork. Ethan exhaled, something caught between a sigh and something softer. "We'll see," he said, which Lena had learned from watching enough parents in her shop over the years meant yes. Mom, The snow was heavier when she left. It had committed itself to the city the way snow sometimes did. Not hostile, just thorough, covering things that needed covering and making the familiar streets look temporary. Lena drove back to the shop slowly, the van's old wipers doing their uneven best against the windshield. She had a 7 o'clock consultation with a bride who was almost certain she wanted peonies in February, which meant Lena would spend 45 minutes gently explaining the difficulty of sourcing peonies in February in a way that didn't sound like no, but functionally communicated no. She had work to do. Real, ordinary, necessary work. She had a contract with a foundation and an empty cup holder in a shop that was, for the first time in 8 months, not immediately drowning. She had no business thinking about the way a 7-year-old girl had looked at a flower arrangement like she was trying to remember the name of something she already knew. She had no business thinking about the man standing next to her with his hands in his pockets and his voice going quiet when he said Claire, her mother, and stopping as if the sentence had a door he'd decided not to open all the way. She drove through the snow with the radio on low and told herself she was being professional, and the flowers in the back of the van filled the whole car with their cold green scent, and she was almost entirely successful at thinking about nothing else. The holidays moved through the city the way they always did in New York, noisy and mercantile and lit up with a beauty that was completely manufactured and somehow real anyway. Lena worked through most of it, Christmas wreaths and table pieces, and the elaborate holiday installation she'd been commissioned to design for the foundation's lobby, which involved 40 stems of white amaryllis and enough pine boughs to make the whole building smell like a forest. She worked late on the installation. It was December 22nd, and she'd sent Pedro home at 6 because he had a family dinner, and she didn't, not exactly. Her father was in Phoenix now, a whole other life, and Dana was going to her girlfriend's family in Connecticut, and the December her mother had died 3 years ago had made this particular month feel like a country she visited annually but never fully re-entered. She was up on a ladder adjusting a spray of pine when she heard the door. Ethan. He wasn't supposed to be here. She knew his schedule loosely, the way you know the schedule of someone you cross paths with regularly. He was usually in the corporate building on Wednesdays, the foundation on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Tonight was a Tuesday, but late. She'd thought she was alone. He stopped when he saw the ladder. "You're still here," he said. Installation took longer than planned. She didn't come down. She was holding a wire and 6 inches of pine, and she was going to finish the thought before she lost it. "Hand me that cluster of amaryllis." "On the table." He looked at the table, found the amaryllis, came forward and held it up to her. Their hands were close for a moment when she took it, not touching, but close. The way hands get when you're passing something from one person to another in a small space. "It looks incredible," he said, stepping back and looking up at the installation. He said it the way people say things when they actually mean them, without the particular inflation that compliments tend to pick up in professional settings. "It'll look better with these." She wired the amaryllis into place, stepped back slightly on the ladder to check the balance. The proportions were off on the right side. I kept thinking it was fine, and then looking at it from across the room and knowing it wasn't. "That's a very particular kind of torture," he said. "Yeah." She came down the ladder. "What are you doing here this late?" He had a folder under his arm. She noticed it now. His jacket was damp at the shoulders from the snow still coming down outside. "I wanted to drop off the January calendar for the foundation events. Marcus usually does it, but..." He set the folder on the front table. "Sophie's with my sister tonight. I needed somewhere to be." She looked at him. He said it like a simple statement of fact, without embarrassment or self-pity. I needed somewhere to be. And she understood, in a way that didn't require explanation, that December was probably a specific kind of difficult for him, the way it was for her, the way it was for anyone who had lost someone and then had to live through the annual, obligatory brightness of the season. "There's coffee," she said. "The machine in the back is old, but it works." He looked at her for a moment, then, "Yeah, okay." They sat in the back room of the foundation, the work table between them, both of them holding coffee cups that were a little too hot to drink yet, and talked for 2 hours. Not about flowers, not about contracts. He told her about Sophie's fear of escalators, which had developed suddenly at age 5 and showed no signs of resolving. She told him about the time her mother had driven 4 hours to a flower market in New Jersey to find a specific variety of pale blue delphinium for a client's wedding, and had gotten a flat tire and been stranded on the shoulder of the highway with 60 stems of flowers in the back seat, texting Lena a series of updates that were increasingly philosophical in tone. He laughed at that, a real laugh, not a polished one, the kind that comes out slightly before you've decided to let it. She noticed the way it changed his face. She told herself she wasn't noticing. He told her about the kintsugi repair, that he'd paid a specialist to do it, someone who worked out of a studio in the West Village, and that it had taken 3 weeks and cost about as much as a small appliance, but that he didn't care. Is it different? She asked, looking at it now. He thought about it, really thought about it, which she appreciated. Yeah, he said, it's heavier somehow, more present. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. Before, it was just there. I knew it was there, but I didn't look at it. Now the cracks are gold, and I look at it every morning. I'm not sure if that's better or worse. Maybe it's just different, she said. He met her eyes across the work table. Yeah, he said. Maybe. It was nearly 10 when she packed up, and he walked her out to her van. The snow had stopped. The city was doing that thing it does after snow, when everything is quieter than usual, and the lights reflect off the white on the ground, and the world looks temporarily like a place where nothing bad happens. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the cold. Merry Christmas, Lena, he said. Merry Christmas, Ethan. She drove home through the quiet streets, thinking about the way he'd said, I needed somewhere to be, like it was the most ordinary sentence in the world, and about the laugh that had come out of him before he'd decided to let it happen, and about the pot on the work table upstairs with its gold seams catching the light. She thought about her mother, who had driven 4 hours for blue delphinium and gotten stranded on the highway, and texted her a series of messages that grew increasingly philosophical, the last of which had said, Flowers are worth the trouble, Lena. People are worth the trouble. Remember that. She pulled into her parking spot, sat in the van for a moment with the engine off. She was in so much trouble. January came in hard. Not the romantic kind of cold that makes the city look like a postcard. The other kind. The kind that gets into the gaps in your coat and makes your face ache by the time you reach the door. The kind that kills car batteries and freezes pipes and turns every commute into a small act of endurance. Lena drove to the wholesale flower market at 5:30 every Tuesday and Friday morning and loaded the van in temperatures that made her fingers stop working properly after about 8 minutes. And she told herself this was fine. She had done this for 6 years. She knew how to be cold. The foundation contract had changed things in ways she was still calculating. The back rent was paid. The small business loan she'd taken in October had its first payment covered. She'd been able to order a new cold case for the front of the shop. Not new, used from a closing florist in Queens, but functional and the right size and not making the grinding sound her old one had been making since September. Pedro was working 4 days a week now instead of 2. She'd taken on a custom wedding contract for April that she would have passed on before because she wouldn't have had the capacity. The shop was still fragile. She knew better than to mistake a good month for a changed situation. But it was breathing again, the way something breathes when it's been given a little room. She kept telling herself the contract was the reason she thought about the foundation every day. The contract, the professional relationship, the significant scope of work she had committed to through the end of the year. Not the man who had sat across a work table from her on a December night and laughed before he'd decided to, and said I needed somewhere to be, like it was a completely ordinary thing to admit. She was 5 weeks into telling herself this when Marcus called on a Thursday afternoon and said, with the careful neutrality of someone reading from a script that was not technically a script, Mr. Calloway would like to invite you to see the design studio at the penthouse. He's been using it as storage, but he'd like to repurpose it for the gala planning, and he wants your input on whether the space works before he invests in setting it up. Lena was trimming hyacinths. She kept trimming. The penthouse, she said. His residence. The studio was... His wife used it. It's been closed since. Marcus paused. He said to tell you there's no obligation. He'll understand if you'd prefer to work from the foundation building. She set down the shears. She understood what she was being offered. Not just the studio. Not just the professional usefulness of a larger workspace. She understood that a room closed for 3 years being opened again was not a casual decision, and that the man asking her to walk into it was not making a casual ask, regardless of how Marcus had phrased it. "Tell him yes," she said. "I can come Saturday morning if that works." "Saturday works," Marcus said. She picked up the shears and went back to the hyacinths and absolutely did not sit with the weight of what she'd just agreed to for more than about 4 minutes before Pedro came in from the back, asking about the ranunculus order, which needed an answer, and the day continued. The penthouse was on the Upper East Side, in a building that was old enough to have a doorman and high enough to see most of the city from the upper floors. The doorman, a man named Gerald, who had the measured warmth of someone very good at his job, took her name and called upstairs and then walked her to the elevator himself, which she hadn't expected. "He's on 32, Gerald said. "The elevator opens directly to the foyer." "Thank you." "He doesn't have many visitors," Gerald said, then seemed to decide that was more than he'd intended to say, and added nothing further, and pressed the button for 32. The elevator opened into a foyer with dark herringbone floors and a console table with nothing on it except a single white orchid in a plain ceramic pot. The orchid was healthy. Someone was taking care of it. Ethan was in the kitchen when she came in. She could hear movement, the sound of something being set down, water running. The apartment from this angle was large and clean and quiet in the specific way that well-maintained spaces get when only one person is living in them, and that person is orderly out of necessity rather than preference. She looked around the living room while she waited. There were books, real ones, red ones, some of them with their spines bent and pages dog-eared, stacked on a low shelf in a way that was organized and slightly chaotic at the same time. A child's drawing was tacked to the wall near the hallway. A house with a yellow door and 4 stick figures, one of which was notably taller than the others, and one of which had, she squinted, what appeared to be a flower. A Sophie original, she guessed. "She drew that in October," Ethan said from behind her. She turned. He was carrying 2 mugs, coffee, from the smell of it, and wearing a gray Henley and the kind of jeans that had been worn enough times to stop being jeans and start being just what someone wore. He looked, she thought, like himself, not the office version or the corporate building version, just himself. "The 4 figures," she said. "Who's who?" He handed her a mug and looked at the drawing. "She's the shortest one. I'm the tall one. That's her aunt, my sister. And that one with the flower is, apparently, the flower lady." Lena looked at the stick figure with the flower. It was holding something that was roughly oval and enthusiastically colored in yellow and orange. "She drew you in the picture," he said, "before I knew she'd done it. I came home from a work trip, and it was already on the wall." Lena wrapped both hands around the mug. The coffee was good, better than she'd expected, which was unfair because she didn't know why she'd expected anything particular. "The studio's upstairs," he said. "I should tell you something before we go up." She waited. He looked at the mug in his hands for a moment, then back at her. It was Claire's space. She painted, not professionally, just for herself. She did it most nights after Sophie went to bed. After the accident, I had it closed. I didn't change anything, I just closed it. He stopped. "I went up there 2 weeks ago for the first time since. I thought I was going to fall apart, and I didn't. I thought I should tell you that so you understand what it is we're walking into." Lena looked at him steadily. "Thank you for telling me," she said. He nodded. "Come on." The studio was on the upper level of the penthouse, a wide-open room with a slanted ceiling and a skylight running most of the length of it, which, on a January morning, let in the particular white-gray light of winter clouds, diffuse and even, and actually quite beautiful for work. There were shelves along one wall with supplies Claire had left. Paint, brushes, jars with dried pigment on the outside, the evidence of regular use. An easel stood in the corner with an unfinished canvas on it, something abstract, blue and green and not finished. And the not-finishedness of it was the hardest thing in the room to look at. Ethan stood near the door and watched Lena move through the space. She was careful. She looked at the light from the skylight, the way it fell on the work table that had been pushed to one side. She looked at the floor space, the storage shelves, the secondary window at the north end. She did not look at the easel. She understood, without being told, that the easel was not part of what she'd been invited to see. "The skylight is exceptional," she said. "Most florists would sell a body part for this kind of light." "It was one of the reasons she wanted this apartment," he said. Lena turned. "I can make this work for gala planning. The table gives me room to do full-scale mock-ups of the centerpieces, which I'd normally have to do at the shop and then transport. The light means I can color match properly instead of guessing under artificial." She looked around the room again. "The shelves on the left will work for material storage. I'd want to clear them and put in some ventilation for cut flowers, but that's not complicated." "Whatever you need," he said. "I'll make a list. I don't want to take up more of the room than the work requires." "Lena." He said her name with the slight weight of someone interrupting a professional inventory. "The whole room is available. You don't need to negotiate for corners." She looked at him. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms loosely crossed, looking at her with the particular expression she'd been cataloging without meaning to over the past 2 months. Something watchful and quiet that he didn't bother to cover the way he covered other things. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She stayed 3 hours. They went through the gala planning documents at the table Claire had used for painting, and Lena spread out reference photos and fabric swatches and preliminary sketches, and Ethan asked questions that were actually about the work, specific, precise, occasionally catching her off guard because they required her to think rather than just explain. He had a good eye, she realized. He'd been around enough architecture and design in his professional life that he understood proportion and why certain decisions mattered, and he was direct about what he liked and what he didn't in a way that made the collaboration faster and more honest than she'd anticipated. Around noon, Sophie called. She was at her aunt's, Ethan's sister Rachel, who was apparently the source of the weekly Saturday custody arrangement that freed Ethan up until 4. He answered the call, and Sophie's voice came through the phone loud enough that Lena could hear it from across the table. High, rapid, asking a question about whether her aunt's cat, named Professor Whiskers, was allowed to eat cheese. "I genuinely don't know," Ethan said. "Ask your aunt." "She doesn't know either. We Googled it, and some websites said yes, and some said it might make them sick." "Then probably don't give him cheese. He wants it, though. He's looking at it." "Cats want a lot of things that aren't good for them. That's kind of their whole situation." Sophie made a sound of deep moral conflict. Then, "Is the flower lady there?" Ethan glanced at Lena across the table. "Yes." "Ask her about the cheese. She knows about plants, and I bet she knows about animals, too." Ethan looked at Lena with an expression that was approximately 50% apologetic and 50% something he was trying not to show. He held out the phone. Lena took it. "Sophie, does cheese hurt cats?" "Small amounts of hard cheese are usually okay," Lena said, "but cats are lactose intolerant, so too much gives them a stomachache. I'd give Professor Whiskers about the size of my thumbnail. That way he got what he wanted, and you're not in trouble later." "That's so smart," Sophie said with the wholehearted admiration of a 7-year-old who had just received functionally useful information. "Are you at our house?" "I'm in the studio upstairs, working on the gala flowers." "Is the studio nice? Dad said it was going to be nice." Lena looked at the skylight, the winter light coming through it, the room with its shelves of someone else's paint, and the unfinished canvas in the corner that she was not looking at. "It's very nice," she said. "Best light in the city, probably." "Can I see it when I come home?" "That's up to your dad." She handed the phone back to Ethan. He listened to Sophie for another 30 seconds, said, 4 o'clock, I'll pick you up, don't give the cat more cheese, and hung up. He looked at Lena. "She likes you," he said. "She's easy to like back." Something moved through his face, gratitude, or something more complicated than gratitude, something that involved Sophie and the months before Lena and the particular loneliness of raising a child through grief when you were still inside your own. "She hasn't connected with many people since..." He stopped. "She's friendly. She's good with adults, but she's careful. She watches people before she decides." He looked down at the table. "She decided about you faster than she's decided about anyone in a while." Lena didn't say anything. She put her hands flat on the table over her sketches and looked at the winter light coming through the skylight and thought about a 7-year-old girl who watched people before she decided, and who had drawn a stick figure with a flower and put it on the wall before anyone had thought to discuss whether that was appropriate. "She's a good kid," Lena said, because it was true, and because it was safer than the other things she could have said. "Yeah," Ethan said, "she really is." They packed up at 1:30, and he walked her to the elevator. She had her bag and her portfolio under one arm and a list of supply specifications in her other hand, all the professional armor of a person who was here for work and knew exactly what that meant. The elevator came. She got in. "Same time next Saturday?" he asked. "I'll confirm with Marcus." He almost smiled. Almost. "You can confirm with me." "I know," she said. The doors started to close. "I'll confirm with you." The ride down was 32 floors, and she spent most of it looking at the grain of the elevator panel and thinking about how the studio smelled like dried paint and something that might have been a particular brand of hand lotion, and the very faint, almost imaginary trace of flowers, as if the room remembered something the rest of the apartment had tried to move past. She was in trouble. She had been in trouble since December. The trouble had now acquired a skylight and a 7-year-old and a stick figure drawn on a wall, and she was no longer under any illusion that the contract was the reason she thought about any of this. She walked out into the January cold and thought, with a clarity that didn't particularly help anything, "What are you doing, Lena?" She didn't answer herself. She got in the van and drove back to Brooklyn and made a list of supply specifications that was extremely detailed and entirely focused on flowers, and the day continued. The Saturdays became a pattern so gradually that Lena almost didn't notice it establishing itself until it was already established. She came to the studio every week with her materials and her sketches, and Ethan would make coffee and sometimes be on a call when she arrived and would make a gesture of apology, and she'd wave it off and set up at the table, and he'd wrap up the call and come find her and they'd work. Or she'd work and he'd sit across from her reading something from the pile of folders he always seemed to have, and the silence was comfortable, in the way that silences between people are only comfortable once both people have decided, separately and without discussing it, that they don't need to fill the space. She learned things about him the way you learn things about people who are not telling you about themselves, in pieces, at angles. He read physical books and never remembered to return library holds, so he just bought the same books he could have borrowed. He had terrible handwriting that he was genuinely self-conscious about, to the point that he printed all his personal notes in block letters like a person filling out a form. He didn't eat breakfast, which Sophie's school had apparently flagged at a parent-teacher conference as setting a bad example, and which he had responded to by buying a box of cereal he put on the counter every morning and looked at without consuming. He knew more about flowers than he let on. She caught him one Saturday in late January, looking up something on his phone, and when she glanced over, he angled the screen away with the slightly self-conscious speed of a person who had been caught doing something slightly embarrassing. "What are you looking up?" she asked. "Nothing." "Ethan." He looked at his phone, then at her, then with the expression of someone making a decision about how much dignity to sacrifice. "I was looking up the difference between hellebores and anemones. You mentioned hellebores for the March centerpieces, and I wanted to understand why." She looked at him for a moment. "You could have just asked me." "I was going to ask you once I understood the basic." "Ethan, ask me." He put the phone down. "What's the difference between hellebores and anemones, and why did you choose hellebores for the March Gala?" "Hellebores bloom in late winter," she said. "They're one of the only flowers that come up through frost. They're not cheerful. They're not going to give you the Valentine's Day arrangement feeling. They're quieter. They nod downward, which is unusual for a flower, and the colors are dusty and a little melancholy. But for a March event that's raising money for housing initiatives, families in crisis, people rebuilding, I don't want the flowers to feel like a party. I want them to feel like resilience." She paused. "The hellebore is the flower that showed up when the ground was still frozen. That's the story I'm trying to tell." He was quiet for a moment. "That's why you're good at this," he said. "Because I can explain it?" "Because you already had the story before you picked the flower. Most people pick the flower and then figure out what to say about it." She looked at her sketches. Felt, in the uncomplicated and unhelpful way that feelings presented themselves sometimes, a warmth in her chest that she was going to attribute to the excellent heating in the penthouse, and leave it at that, My mother taught me that, she said. Every arrangement tells a story. If you don't know what story you're telling, you're just putting plants in water. What story did she tell most? He asked. It was a question she hadn't expected. She was quiet for a moment. She did weddings mostly. She loved weddings, not because of the romance part. She was fairly unsentimental about that. She loved them because she said weddings were the one occasion in a person's life where they were surrounded by every living thing that mattered to them, and also by flowers, which meant they were getting everything exactly right, even if they didn't know it. Lena looked at the table. She said flowers are the only thing people bring to every significant moment. Weddings, funerals, births, illnesses, apologies, every turning point. She said that was the flowers being honest about what they understood. She hadn't meant to say all of that. It came out of her the way things come out when you've stopped performing the version of yourself you use for new people. When did she die? He asked. 3 years ago, March. She kept her voice even, the way she'd learned. Cancer. She knew for 8 months, and she spent 6 of them in the shop because she said if she was going to spend her last year anywhere, it was going to be where she understood things. Ethan didn't say he was sorry. She appreciated that. The people who said I'm sorry sometimes meant it, and sometimes were just giving you a conversational off-ramp, and she'd learned not to rely on the phrase as an indicator of anything. Instead, he said, "Did she know the shop was struggling?" She left me the shop and a lease and a cold case that was already making that sound. Lena almost smiled. She knew. She figured I'd figure it out. She wasn't wrong. I just needed more time than she gave me to figure it out in. She trusted you. She trusted the flowers, Lena said. She said people who really love flowers will always find a way to keep them growing. She was talking about the business. I think she was also talking about other things. She looked at the skylight. She was like that. Said things that were about 2 things at once and made you figure out which one she meant. My mother was like that, Ethan said. Then stopped. She waited. She passed when I was 26, he said. Before Claire, before Soph, I always thought she'd have been good at the grandmother part. Claire's parents are in San Francisco. They come when they can. Sophie knows them. But my mother would have been in it every day. He looked at his hands. She would have had opinions about the flowers in this building, actually. She grew up with them. Her family had a small nursery in Connecticut before the land got bought out. She used to talk about the smell of greenhouses in February. Like summer in a box, she said. Lena looked at him. Something had clicked into place, a piece of information settling against another piece she hadn't known she had. What was her family's name? She asked. The nursery. He looked at her. Hartwell. Why? Lena set down her pen. My mother talked about a nursery called Hartwell, she said slowly. She went there every February for the first 3 years she ran the shop, when she was first sourcing her wholesale stock. She said the woman who ran it knew more about flower genetics than anyone she'd ever met. She said this woman let her walk the greenhouse for an hour and take notes and never charged her for the time. She paused. She talked about her for years. She said that hour in the greenhouse was what gave her the confidence to keep going in those first years. Ethan was very still. My mother's name was Eleanor, he said. That was the name, Lena said quietly. The studio was very quiet. Outside, January was doing its usual thing with the wind off the river, but up here in the skylight room, it couldn't touch anything. She thought about her mother driving to a greenhouse in Connecticut in February and spending an hour with a woman who showed her how things grew. She thought about the specific way one person's generosity could thread forward through years and circumstances into something neither person could have predicted or planned for. She thought about the flower shop still standing because of that hour in the greenhouse, and the pot on the studio table with its gold seams and a 7-year-old girl who watched people before she decided. Small world, she said, because it was the most honest and the most insufficient thing available. Yeah, Ethan said. He sounded like someone who had received news they didn't know what category to put in. Yeah, it is. Neither of them said anything for a while. She went back to her sketches. He went back to his folder. The studio held them both in the winter light without requiring either of them to be anything other than what they were. Sophie arrived at 4:15, 15 minutes later than scheduled, because she had been in the middle of a very serious conversation with Professor Whiskers about his dietary restrictions and had needed to reach a natural stopping point. She came upstairs to the studio without being asked, which meant she had been told about it and had been thinking about it all day, and she stood in the doorway and looked around with the same focused attention she'd brought to the anemones in the Foundation lobby 3 weeks ago. Her eyes moved to the easel in the corner, to the unfinished canvas. She looked at it for a long moment without going toward it. "That's Mama's," she said. "Yeah," Ethan said. Sophie looked at the canvas a moment longer. Then she looked at the rest of the room. The work table, Lena's sketches spread out on it, the reference photos pinned to the board Lena had brought, the sample flowers in small vases she'd arranged for color reference. "It looks different with your stuff in it," Sophie said. "Is that okay?" Lena asked. Sophie considered this with the gravity she brought to questions that deserved it. "I think it's good," she said finally. "Rooms should be used." Ethan looked at his daughter. He didn't say anything, but Lena, from her angle at the table, saw what moved through his face. Something that was more than relief, something that included relief and moved past it, into a different country she didn't have a name for. The expression of a person who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has just, without ceremony, been handed the smallest part of a lighter load. "Rooms should be used," he repeated. He said it quietly, to himself. "That's what Mrs. Okafor says at school," Sophie said, already moving toward the table to look at Lena's sketches. "She says unused potential is just sadness waiting to happen." She peered at the hellebore sketches. "Are those the flowers for the party?" "The gala," Lena said. "Yes." "They look sad." "They're supposed to. They're the kind of flower that blooms when everything else is still frozen. That's a different kind of beautiful." Sophie looked at the sketches for another long moment. "I like them," she said, in the tone of someone announcing a verdict. "They look real, not fake flower pretty." Lena looked at this 7-year-old child with her fox backpack and her pronunciation of fake flower pretty like it was an aesthetic category she had developed entirely on her own, and felt something she was going to refuse to name for the foreseeable future. "That's exactly what I was going for," Lena said. Sophie nodded, satisfied. "Then, can I help? For the gala?" "Sophie," Ethan started, "I can put stems in water. I'm good at it, and I can sort colors." She looked at Lena with the expression of someone presenting a reasonable business case. "I won't break anything." Lena looked at Ethan. He had his arms crossed, but the expression underneath the parental instinct to apply brakes was something quieter, a question he was asking her without asking it, about whether this was all right, whether Sophie's wanting to be in the middle of this thing was something Lena could carry. "Next Saturday," Lena said to Sophie. "Bring clothes you don't mind getting flower water on, and I'll teach you how to prep stems." Sophie's face opened up like a door blown wide. "Okay," she said, with a control that was clearly costing her some effort. "Okay, yeah." She turned and went downstairs, probably to find the box of cereal in the kitchen that Ethan looked at every morning without consuming, and Ethan watched her go and then looked at Lena. "Thank you," he said. "She's not a problem," Lena said. "She's going to be very good at sorting stems." "Probably." He looked at the door Sophie had gone through. "She hasn't asked to help with anything in a while. She used to, she'd want to help with everything, whatever I was doing, even boring stuff. Helping me with things was kind of her whole deal, and then around last spring she stopped asking." He was quiet. "I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know if it needed fixing or if she was just growing out of it." Lena began collecting her sketches from the table. "She didn't grow out of it," she said. "She was waiting until she trusted whatever it was she was going to help with." Ethan was quiet. "That's not just a 7-year-old thing," Lena said. She tucked her portfolio under her arm. "That's a person thing." She said goodnight and went down to the foyer and the elevator and the lobby, and Gerald, who held the door for her with a warmth that felt personal rather than professional, and she came out into the January evening where the cold hit her like a wall and the city was doing its dark and lit up thing in every direction. She sat in the van for a moment before starting it, her hands on the wheel, thinking about 2 women, one who ran a greenhouse, one who ran a flower shop, who had stood in the same room 30 years ago with no idea what their lives would arrange into, and thinking about how her mother always said that flowers understood something about timing that people spent their whole lives trying to learn. The engine turned over on the second try. She pulled out into traffic and drove home through the dark, thinking about timing and greenhouses and the particular weight of a connection that had been growing in the wrong direction until suddenly it hadn't, and now she was sitting with it in both hands. The way Ethan had sat with those clay pieces on the office floor, trying to figure out whether it was the kind of thing that broke all the way or the kind that could be put back together in a different shape. The February cold eventually softened, not quickly, and February became March, and the gala approached with the specific pressure of a deadline that has been theoretical for months and then suddenly is not. She worked 3 Saturdays in the studio in the last 4 weeks before the event, and Sophie came to 2 of them and turned out to be exactly as advertised, excellent at STEM prep and color sorting, and also at asking questions that required Lena to explain things in a way that made her understand them better herself. "Why do you cut the stems at an angle?" Sophie asked on the second Saturday, sitting at the work table with water up to her wrists and a small pair of safety shears. "Because a straight cut closes flat against the bottom of the vase, and the flower can't drink. The angle keeps an opening. More surface, more water, longer life." Sophie looked at the stem in her hand, made the cut at the angle Lena had shown her. "That's kind of sad," she said, "that they need a special cut to drink." "They're already cut from the root," Lena said. "Everything after that is just giving them the best possible version of what's left." Sophie was quiet, doing 3 more stems with the careful deliberateness of someone who had taken a lesson seriously. "Is that what you do with sad things?" Sophie asked. "Give them the best possible version of what's left?" Lena stopped trimming. She looked at this 7-year-old with her fox backpack hanging from a hook on the wall, and her water-wet wrists and her eyes that watched people before deciding. "I try," she said. Sophie nodded, filed it, went back to stems. Ethan, from the corner of the room where he'd been reading for the past hour, had gone very still. Lena didn't look at him directly. She understood, from the quality of the silence, that he'd heard the exchange and that it had gone somewhere in him that the reading material and the folder and all the managed composure of his daily life couldn't reach. She gave him the silence. She went back to the hellebores. The gala was on the 15th of March, a Thursday, in the Foundation's main event space, a reclaimed industrial building in Midtown that the Foundation had renovated into a gathering place for community events and fundraisers. Lena spent the day of the event doing installation, arriving at 7 in the morning with her van and Pedro, and a borrowed van from a friend, and approximately 400 stems of various flowers, and she was on her feet for 11 hours straight, which she was fine with because this was the part she loved. The part where the sketches and the plans and the sample arrangements collapsed into one real, breathing thing that filled a room and told its story. The hellebores nodded over the tables exactly as she'd intended. The dusty miller ran silver along the table runners. The whole room smelled like cold earth and something just beginning, which was exactly the story she'd been trying to tell since she'd first told Ethan about resilience and the flowers that bloom through frost. She was standing near the back of the room at 8:30, finally still, with a glass of water and the specific exhaustion of someone whose work is finished and done well, when Ethan found her. He was in his gala suit, which was dark and well-fitted and made him look the way powerful men looked when they were comfortable with power, rather than anxious about it. He'd given a short speech 20 minutes earlier that she'd half heard from the installation room while she was making a final adjustment to a table near the entrance. Something about the Foundation's next phase, about the communities they served, about what it meant to build something that outlasted whatever was broken in the beginning. He came to stand beside her and looked at the room. "Lena," he said. "I know," she said. "No, I mean—" He stopped, looked at her. "I had an image in my head of what this room could be. Not a plan, just an image, something I couldn't articulate. You found it." She looked at the room, the nodding flowers, the silver runners, the warm light coming through the industrial windows, the people moving through it with the ease of people who felt invited rather than impressed. "I had good material to work with," she said. "I'm talking about the room," he said. "Not the event. The room. What you did to it." She met his eyes. This was, she thought, a moment where a sensible person said, "Thank you," This has been a wonderful collaboration. Please excuse me while I speak to the caterer. A sensible person kept the professional perimeter and the appropriate distance and the careful management of everything she'd been managing since November. But she was tired from 11 hours on her feet, and the room looked exactly the way she'd imagined it, and he was looking at her with that watchful quiet that had been working on her defenses for 4 months. And the sensible thing felt, at this particular moment, like a country she couldn't reach. "Thank you," she said, "for giving me the studio, for trusting me with it." He was quiet for a moment. "It didn't feel like trust at first," he said. "It felt like... I didn't know what it felt like. I just knew I wanted you in that room." The sentence sat there between them. Neither of them looked away from it or toward it. They both looked at the room, at the flowers, at the people moving through the story she'd built out of frost-blooming things. "Ethan," she said. "I know," he said, quietly. Like I know was its own complete sentence, with its own grammar. A board member appeared at his elbow then, requiring his attention, which was both a relief and not a relief, and Ethan turned with the practiced ease of someone who spent his life being required. And Lena took her glass of water and walked toward the entrance and stood in the doorway for a moment, looking back at the room she'd made. The hellebores nodded in the slight current from the ventilation. The silver runners caught the light. The room held its story. Resilience, frost, the particular beauty of things that showed up when the ground was still hard. She thought, "I am in significant, irreversible trouble." Then she went back inside and worked the rest of the night with professional composure, because she was practical and she was careful, and she had learned from necessity how to carry things that needed carrying, and that was, she thought, perhaps the truest thing about her. But that night, driving home through the March darkness, with the van empty and smelling of eucalyptus and cold earth, she stopped pretending that any of this was only about the flowers. The morning after the gala, Lena slept until 9:30, which almost never happened. She woke up with the particular heaviness of someone whose body had submitted an itemized bill for 11 hours on concrete floors, and she lay in bed for a few minutes looking at the ceiling before her brain came fully online, and she remembered in sequence the room full of nodding hellebores and the silver runners, and Ethan standing beside her saying, "I just knew I wanted you in that room," and her own internal response to that, which she had been managing with varying degrees of success since approximately 8:45 the previous evening. She made coffee. She sat at her kitchen table with both hands around the mug and the March light coming through the window above the sink, and told herself, with the practicality she had spent 30 years developing, that wanting something and being wise about wanting something were two different skills, and she had always been better at the second one. The phone buzzed. "Dana." "So, how'd it go? And I don't mean the flowers." Lena stared at the message. "Dana, I can see you read it." Lena, "The flowers were perfect." Dana, "Lena." Lena put the phone face down and finished her coffee. She picked it back up. Lena, "I don't know what I'm doing." Dana, "Yes, you do. That's the problem." She didn't reply to that because Dana was her best friend and had known her since they were 22 and working adjacent retail jobs in the same Brooklyn strip mall, and Dana had the specific talent of identifying the exact true thing and saying it without decoration, and the exact true thing, at 9:45 on a Friday morning in March, was more than Lena was prepared to manage before a second cup of coffee. She went to the shop. She did inventory. She called her wholesale supplier about the April wedding order and spent 40 minutes discussing the specific shade difference between blush and ivory and garden roses in a way that required genuine concentration, and she was grateful for the requirement. At 2 in the afternoon, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Harper and Bloom. "Ms. Harper?" A woman's voice, professionally neutral in the way that had been deliberately cultivated. "This is Andrea Voss. I'm calling from the Chronicle, the Business and Society desk. I was hoping to speak with you about your professional relationship with Ethan Calloway and the Calloway Foundation." Lena set down the stem she was holding. "I'm sorry," she said. "Who are you with?" "The Chronicle. We're running a piece on the Calloway Foundation's recent expansion and the controversy surrounding some of its contract decisions. I wanted to give you an opportunity to comment before publication." Something cold moved through Lena's chest that had nothing to do with the cold case humming beside her. What controversy? She said. Mr. Calloway has faced questions about the awarding of significant floral contracts to your business, Harper and Bloom, given what sources describe as a personal relationship between you and Mr. Calloway. The concern being raised is whether foundation resources have been directed based on personal connection rather than merit. A pause. I wanted to give you a chance to respond. Lena kept her voice level through an act of will that cost her something. The contract was arranged through a standard procurement process, she said. I'd suggest you verify that with the foundation directly. We have reached out to the foundation. I wanted your perspective as well. Can I ask how long you've known Mr. Calloway personally? I'd suggest you contact the foundation, Lena said again. Thank you for calling. She hung up. She stood in the back room of her shop with the wholesale supplier's invoice in one hand and the phone in the other, and her heart doing something irregular that she couldn't entirely attribute to professional alarm. She called Marcus. I know, he said before she finished explaining. We received the inquiry this morning. Legal is preparing a response. Mr. Calloway has been informed. What is this actually about? She said. Who's running the story? Marcus was quiet for a half-second too long. We believe it originated with Mercer Capital. They've been attempting to acquire 2 of the foundation's partner properties for redevelopment. The foundation has been an obstacle. This appears to be, he paused, a pressure campaign. Against him. Against the foundation. You're part of the story because you're a visible point of contact and the contract amount is significant enough to attract scrutiny. Another pause. Mr. Calloway would like to speak with you directly. He's available this afternoon if... I'll call him myself, she said. She did, 10 minutes later, sitting in her van in the alley behind the shop because she couldn't have this conversation inside where Pedro might hear it. Ethan picked up on the second ring. Lena, tell me what's actually happening. He told her. Mercer Capital had been circling 2 properties in the South Bronx that the foundation used as community resource centers for the past 18 months, low-income housing and after-school programming. The foundation had blocked 2 acquisition attempts through city planning processes. 2 weeks ago, Mercer had brought in a PR firm. The Chronicle piece, from what his legal team had identified, was seeded by sources with direct Mercer connections. They're using me, she said. It wasn't a question. They're using the contract to create a narrative about foundation governance, to make donors nervous, to give the board enough political discomfort that the foundation backs away from the property fight. His voice was controlled but had an edge in it, the edge of someone who was angry and was being careful about where the anger was directed. I want you to know that we're going to defend the contract. The procurement documentation is clean. Your work has been documented and evaluated by the foundation's program committee. Ethan. It's going to be fine. Ethan, stop. He stopped. How bad is this going to get? She asked. A pause. I don't know yet. The Chronicle piece is coming out Monday. What it says depends on what else they've been given. Legal is trying to find out. What does the board think? Another pause, slightly longer. Some of the board members have concerns, he said, about perception, about donor confidence. She understood what that meant. She understood the particular grammar of some board members have concerns in an institutional context. It meant the pressure was already internal, already moving, already requiring management. It meant that Ethan was fighting on 2 fronts. I'm going to be a problem for you, she said. You're not a problem. The story they're going to tell is that you gave foundation money to a woman you have feelings for. She said it flat and direct, the way she said things when being direct was the only useful option. Whether or not that's true, whether or not the contract was clean, that's the story. And a story like that, the contract was clean. The work has been exceptional. There's no... Ethan. Her voice was steady. I know the contract was clean. You know the contract was clean. I'm telling you what the story is going to be regardless of what we know. The silence that followed had a specific weight to it. What are you saying? He asked. Quiet, careful. I'm saying I need to think, she said. She drove back into the shop and finished the day on autopilot. Filled orders, answered 2 phone calls, talked Pedro through a substitution on a sympathy arrangement because the white carnations he'd ordered hadn't come in. She did all of it with the surface part of her brain, while the deeper part turned the situation over and over, looking at it from every angle she could find. The Chronicle piece ran Monday morning. It was not the worst version of the story it could have been, but it was not good. The headline was careful, questions raised over Callaway Foundation's vendor practices, and the text was structured to seem balanced while doing a specific amount of damage. It quoted anonymous sources with knowledge of the foundation's internal operations. It mentioned the contract amount. It mentioned that Lena had been seen at the foundation's main building on multiple occasions outside of service hours. It noted that she had attended the gala as, the article phrased it, more than a vendor. It did not say anything demonstrably false. That was the sophisticated version of this kind of attack, and it was the one that was hardest to defend against. By Monday afternoon, 2 major donors had contacted the foundation to express concern. By Tuesday, a board member named Warren Giles had sent an email to the full board recommending an internal review of all recent vendor contracts. By Wednesday, Marcus was fielding calls from 3 journalists, and Ethan's legal team was in the foundation building for 7 hours. Lena read about most of this through Marcus, who called her every morning with an update in the flat, thorough way he did things, and through the small amount she allowed herself to read online, which she kept limited because the comments section of anything related to Ethan Callaway was a place she could not spend time without feeling something she didn't have the capacity for. She and Ethan talked twice that week. Both conversations were short. He was managing multiple fires simultaneously, and she was trying not to become one of them. The board is going to recommend suspension of the contract pending review, he told her on Wednesday evening. His voice was tired in a different way than she'd heard before. Not the fatigue of overwork, but the specific drain of fighting something that should be simple and wasn't. Suspension, she repeated, temporary, until the review clears. He stopped. It's political, not substantive. The review will clear. How long? 8 to 12 weeks. Lena sat with that. 8 to 12 weeks was the April wedding order she'd staffed up for with the contract income in mind. It was Pedro's hours. It was the cold case she'd bought that was now a fixed cost rather than an aspiration. 8 to 12 weeks was, mathematically, the reopening of a wound that had just started to close. Okay, she said. Lena, I said okay. She kept her voice even. I understand. The review is the right process. I'm going to fight it. I know you are. She paused. How's Sophie? A beat. She doesn't know what's happening. She knows I've been stressed. She made me a card on Tuesday that said, Dad, you're doing great, in very uneven letters. He exhaled. Which is possibly the most inaccurate assessment of the week, but I kept it. She's not wrong, Lena said. She's 7. She has incomplete information. She has the information she needs. Lena looked at the flower shop around her. The cold case with its careful arrangements, the wholesale boxes stacked in the back, the shelf by the register where she kept a small jar with the first $20 she'd made after taking over from her mother. Tell her she made me smile. She hung up and sat with the phone in her hand and the shop quiet around her and thought about the particular arithmetic of a situation where doing the right thing and being protected from the consequences of doing the right thing were 2 different calculations that didn't always arrive at the same answer. The thing she had been most careful about for 4 months was the gap between Ethan's world and hers. She had always known it was there. She had always known, in the practical, clear-eyed way, that she knew the cost of hellebores versus anemones, and the difference between what a room could carry and what it couldn't, that the gap existed, and that it was the kind of gap that didn't shrink just because 2 people on either side of it had feelings that were moving toward each other. What she hadn't fully calculated was the way the gap could become a weapon in someone else's hand. She started working on a plan over the following days, the way she worked on any logistical problem, steadily, without drama, with the specific unsentimentality of someone who had learned that feelings were real but couldn't pay the rent. She looked at the shop's books. She talked to Pedro about hours and timing. She pulled out the April wedding contract and reviewed the scope and whether she could cover it without the foundation income. She could. Barely. If she put in the hours herself and deferred her own draw for 6 weeks and called in a favor from her wholesale guy for better terms on the April order, it would be tight in a way that resembled November, survivable, but only with no mistakes. She could manage that. What she couldn't manage was the growing certainty, sharpened by every news cycle and every tense phone call with Marcus, and every board member quote she read in a follow-up piece that ran on Thursday that her continued presence in Ethan's professional life was costing him something that the contract review didn't fully account for. The board member named Warren Giles gave an interview to a second publication on Thursday. He did not name Lena directly. He was careful. The careful version of saying something that named her without naming her. He talked about governance concerns and the importance of separating the foundation's mission from its leadership's personal life, and the particular responsibility that comes with handling community resources. The particular responsibility. The foundation's community resources were housing and after-school programs and job training for families in crisis. That was what Mercer Capital was threatening, not with a competing bid, but with the slow erosion of the foundation's donor base and board cohesion. And the lever they were using was her. She read the Warren Giles interview twice. She looked at the ceiling of her shop for a long time. Then she called Dana. "Tell me I'm wrong," she said. "About what?" "Tell me this is fixable without me removing myself." Dana was quiet for a moment. Dana, who had a business minor and a talent for seeing situations clearly, was quiet for exactly long enough to make Lena's stomach drop. "It's fixable," Dana said, "but it's slower if you stay. The story needs to run out of new material. If you're still in the picture, every week I'm in the picture is another week they have fresh material." "Yeah." Lena closed her eyes. "He's going to fight to keep the contract." "I know. He's going to fight it even if fighting it costs the foundation more than the contract is worth." "Probably," Dana said, "because it's not really about the contract to him." "I know what it's about," Lena said. Dana was quiet. "He told me—" She stopped, started again. "He told Sophie he was going to fight it. She heard him on the phone. She told me when I saw her on Saturday that her dad said the flower lady wasn't going anywhere." Lena's voice stayed steady through Will alone. She said it like it was the best news she'd heard all week. "Lena." "She's 7, Lena said. "She shouldn't be factoring into this. The fact that she is—" She stopped again. "If I'm the reason this gets worse for them—" "You're not the reason. Mercer Capital is the reason." "Yeah. And I'm the tool they're using." She opened her eyes. "There's a difference between who's responsible and what's useful to do about it." She and Dana stayed on the phone for another 10 minutes, talking through the shape of it, and by the time she hung up, the decision had already made itself somewhere in the part of her that made decisions before she consciously caught up to them. She called Marcus Friday morning. "I need to speak to the foundation board directly," she said. "Not through Ethan. I want a board meeting." Marcus hesitated. "Ms. Harper, I don't think— I'm not asking Ethan to arrange it. I'm asking you as a separate party to pass a message to whoever chairs the board that I'd like 15 minutes before they make any decisions about the contract review. Can you do that?" A long pause. "I can pass the message," Marcus said carefully. The board chair was a woman named Gloria Reeves, 64, former nonprofit executive, the kind of person who had spent 4 decades in rooms full of people arguing about things that mattered and had learned to listen for the difference between what was being said and what was actually happening. She called Lena back herself on Friday afternoon, which Lena had not expected. "Ms. Harper," she said, "I understand you wanted to speak with the board." "I wanted to tell you directly that I'm resigning from the foundation contract," Lena said. "Effective immediately. I don't want it to go through Mr. Calloway. I don't want him to have the opportunity to object before the decision is made." A silence. "That's a significant decision," Gloria Reeves said. "The foundation's work is more important than the contract," Lena said. "The properties in the South Bronx, the community centers, those are real things serving real people. The story being built around me is designed to threaten those things. I'm removing the story." "Mr. Calloway will not agree with this decision." "I know," Lena kept her voice even. "He doesn't need to agree with it. It's mine to make." Another silence, longer. "You understand," Gloria Reeves said, "that resigning doesn't end the scrutiny. Mercer Capital has other tools." "I understand, but this removes the clearest one." Lena looked at the window of her shop, at the street outside, at the ordinary Friday traffic of a neighborhood that had always asked things of the people in it. "I'm also going to ask you to do something for me." "What's that?" Don't tell him until I've had a chance to tell him myself. A pause. When will that be? Today? Lena said. I'll go now. She drove to the foundation building. She'd called ahead and confirmed he was there. A board meeting prep session, Marcus had said before she'd cut him off. She parked the van and walked up the front steps of the converted townhouse and went in through the front door that she'd come through every week for 4 months. And Sandra at the front desk looked up at her with the particular expression of someone who understood that something significant was happening and wasn't sure of their role in it. He's on the second floor, Sandra said. Conference room. Thank you. She went up. The hallway was quiet. Through the conference room door, she could hear voices. Ethan and at least 2 other people, the low, deliberate cadence of a working session. She knocked. A pause. The door opened. Ethan looked at her. He took in her face in the way he'd gotten good at, the quick inventory of what was there and what it meant, and something shifted in his expression before she'd said a word. Can I have 5 minutes? She said to the room. Not to him specifically. To the 2 other people at the table who looked at each other and then at Ethan, and then picked up their folders and moved past Lena into the hallway with the professionalism of people who had learned when not to ask questions. The door closed. Just the 2 of them in the conference room with its long table and the afternoon light coming through the tall windows. What happened? He said. Not a question. I called Gloria Reeves this morning, she said. I've resigned the contract. His face did something she didn't have a word for. A series of things in rapid succession, understanding, then resistance, then something that was not anger but was in the same family. No, he said. It's done. Call her back. Ethan. Call her back, Lena. I will fix this. You can't fix this. She kept her voice steady. It cost her. Not quickly enough. Not without giving Mercer Capital 4 more months of material to work with while the board bleeds confidence and the donors get nervous and the community centers in the Bronx end up as someone's luxury development because the foundation spent the year playing defense. She looked at him. This is the thing I can do that you can't. What you're doing is exactly what they want. What they want is the foundation distracted and weakened. Removing me removes half their argument. It changes the story. She put her hands flat on the conference table. You know I'm right. I know you're using logic to make an emotional decision sound reasonable. She almost said something to that, stopped. You're right, she said. It's both. He looked at her across the table. The afternoon light was coming through the windows at the angle it reached in mid-March, low and slanted, the kind of light that made everything it touched look like something worth paying attention to. This is not how this goes, he said. His voice was quiet now, the anger underneath it doing something different. Not fading, but changing into something more complicated and harder to hold. It's exactly how this goes, she said. I walk away before they make you walk me out. That's the version where the foundation keeps its footing and you keep the board together, and you don't have to spend the next 3 months choosing between what's good for the community centers and what you want. What I want, he said, is to not have you disappear. The sentence sat between them, simple, no professional casing on it, just the thing itself. She looked at him, really looked, the way she'd been carefully not doing for months, the full direct version of looking at someone that you avoid because of what it tells you about yourself. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had been managing grief and a company and a foundation and a 7-year-old and a rival corporation's pressure campaign, and had now arrived at a moment where the one thing that had been making the weight bearable was telling him it was leaving. Sophie, she said. It came out before she'd decided to say it. Don't. His voice had an edge now. Not at her. At the situation. She drew me on the wall, Lena said, before anyone discussed whether that was appropriate. She decided about me faster than she'd decided about anyone in a while. You told me that yourself. She stopped. I'm not going anywhere. I need you to hear that clearly. The contract is the contract. What's between us is something else. It doesn't feel like something else right now, he said. It feels like the same thing. That's because you're angry. Yes, he said. I am angry. I'm angry that you called the board before you called me. If I'd called you first, you would have talked me out of it. Maybe I should have had that chance. She was quiet. You didn't trust me to handle this, he said. Not accusing, just saying it. I trusted you too much, she said. That's the actual problem. If I trusted you less, I would have made the professional calculation, and none of this. She stopped. Started over. I called the board first because I knew that if you asked me to stay, I would stay, and staying would cost you things that you shouldn't have to pay. The silence that followed was different from the silences they'd built in the studio, in the back room of the foundation, in the van outside his building in the December snow. Those had been comfortable silences, the kind that meant something was settled. This one meant something was unsettled, and both of them knew it, and neither of them knew what to do with knowing it. I need you to let me do this, she said, and I need you to not read it as something it isn't. What isn't it? His voice was low. It isn't me running. It isn't me deciding it's too complicated. She met his eyes. It's me buying the foundation time and taking the target off your back so that when this blows over, and it will blow over, there's still something worth coming back to. He looked at her for a long moment. And if it doesn't blow over, he said, then we'll have a different conversation. She kept her voice steady. But I think it will. He turned away from her, moved to the window, stood with his back to her looking out at the street below. The converted townhouse's view, the narrow west side street, the late afternoon light on the buildings opposite. Sophie asked about you this morning, he said. She wanted to know if you were coming Saturday. Lena closed her eyes briefly. What did you tell her? I said I didn't know. He kept his back to her. I didn't want to tell her about the review until I knew how it was going to resolve. I didn't want to explain it. He was quiet. She's been so much better, Lena. Since October. Since the flower deliveries. Since the studio. Since she started coming on Saturdays. She's been sleeping better. She stopped having the bad dreams every week. Lena put one hand on the conference table to steady herself. She made me a card, he said. You said that made you smile. It did. She's going to ask me why you stopped coming, he said. And I don't know what I'm going to tell her that she can understand at 7 years old. Tell her the flowers keep growing even when they're not in the shop, Lena said. Her voice was not entirely steady. Tell her that's what a good florist does. She makes sure the things she planted keep growing on their own. He turned from the window. His face was not composed. She'd seen it composed, and she'd seen it unguarded, and this was the version she didn't have a category for yet. Stripped of the management and the control, the one he probably only showed the people he couldn't afford to lose. This is not what I want, he said. I know. She picked up her bag from the chair where she'd set it when she came in. I know, Ethan. She moved toward the door. She put her hand on the handle. Lena. His voice stopped her. She turned. He was standing in the afternoon light with his hands in his pockets and the window behind him, and the particular expression of someone who has something to say and is deciding in real time whether saying it is wise. The studio, he said. It stays yours. Whatever else, that room doesn't go back to what it was. She looked at him. She understood what he was telling her, and it was not about the studio. Okay, she said. She went out into the hallway, down the stairs, through the lobby where Sandra was watching her computer screen with deliberate attention that had nothing to do with whatever was on it. Out the front door and down the steps, into the van, parked on the street in the late March afternoon with its old engine and its broken cup holder and its back that still smelled of eucalyptus and cold earth from the gala. She sat in the driver's seat and did not immediately start the engine. Through the windshield, she watched a woman pushing a stroller on the opposite sidewalk, moving with the particular purposeful speed of someone who had somewhere to be. Watched a delivery truck double park and the driver get out unhurried, because double parking in this city was a negotiation and everyone understood the terms. Ordinary city. Ordinary afternoon. She'd walked into the wrong room in November with 12 pounds of flowers and walked out again 4 months later carrying something she hadn't planned to carry, and now she'd put it down. Or tried to, or done the version of putting it down that a person does when they're not actually capable of putting it down, but they need both hands for something else. She started the van. The article ran its follow-up cycle over the next week. By the following Wednesday, After Lena's resignation had been quietly confirmed by the Foundation's communications team, the Chronicle ran a brief follow-up, noting that the vendor had voluntarily withdrawn from the contract and that the internal review had been suspended pending the board's reassessment. It was 8 sentences buried in the business section. Mercer Capital's PR firm had less material to work with. The story got smaller. Lena watched it get smaller from the distance of the shop, where she was working more hours than she had in months, and talking to Pedro more than usual, and calling Dana every 2 days in the way that people in particular kinds of pain reach for the nearest solid thing. She was fine. She was practical. She had been fine through worse. She told herself that at 7 in the morning, loading wholesale boxes, and at 11 at night, closing the cold case, and at 2 in the afternoon when a customer came in wanting something not too sad, not too cheerful, something in between, and she made them an arrangement of pale lavender sweet peas and white anemones with dusty silver leaves running through it. And the customer looked at it and said, "That's exactly it. How did you know?" "Lucky guess," Lena said. The customer paid and left, and the shop was empty, and Lena stood behind the counter and looked at the arrangement she'd made, still sitting on the work table. The exact middle point between sad and cheerful, the flower language of a person who was managing something without being destroyed by it. She thought about Ethan standing at the conference room window with his hands in his pockets. She thought about Sophie asking if the flower lady was coming Saturday. She thought about the pot on the studio table, its gold-threaded cracks catching the light, sitting in a room she'd been told was still hers. She did not call him. He did not call her. This was, she understood, the shape of the thing she'd asked for. The distance required to let the story shrink, to let the board recover its confidence, to let Mercer Capital run out of leverage points and redirect their attention somewhere else. She had asked for this. She had chosen it deliberately and with clear eyes, and for good reasons that she stood behind entirely. She still hated it the way you hate the correct decision when the correct decision is the painful one. 3 weeks into the quiet, a Wednesday in early April, she was doing her closing inventory when the landline rang. She almost didn't answer it. It was 7:40 and she was done for the day, and the landline was usually either a supplier or a wrong number at this hour. She answered it. "Harper and Bloom." Silence for a moment. Then a small voice. "Hi," Sophie said. "It's Sophie Calloway. I got the number from the website." Lena sat down on her stool. "Hi, Sophie." "Are you coming back?" Sophie asked. Direct, the way she was direct about everything, without the social casing that adults learn to put on difficult questions. "Dad said the flowers keep growing even when they're not in the shop, but I don't really know what that means." Lena looked at the window, at the street outside, at the ordinary April dark with the city lights doing their usual reflected thing off the wet pavement. "It means the things we worked on together don't stop mattering just because we're not in the same room," she said carefully. "The gala flowers, the things we talked about, those still happened." "But are you coming back?" Sophie said. "To the studio, on Saturdays?" Lena closed her eyes, opened them. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Things are complicated right now. Because of the newspaper. You know about that?" "I'm 7, not a baby," Sophie said, with a precision that almost made Lena smile despite herself. "I heard Dad talking. I know people were being mean about the flowers." A pause. "That's really stupid. The flowers were beautiful." "They were," Lena said. "I thought so too." "Dad thinks so too. He still looks at the ones in the studio every morning, the sample ones you left for color reference." A pause. "He moved them to the windowsill, by the skylight." Something moved through Lena's chest that she didn't examine too closely. "Sophie," she said, "does your dad know you're calling me?" A pause. "No." "You should tell him." "Are you going to tell him?" "I think you should," Lena said. "Not because you're in trouble, but you're not in trouble. Because things between adults are complicated, and he should know where you are with this." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "I just wanted to know if you were coming back." "I know." Lena kept her voice gentle. "I'm not going to disappear, Sophie. I promise you that. I can't tell you exactly what things look like when they get less complicated, but I can tell you you're not going to look up one day and find out I was never real." A silence. Okay, Sophie said, small, but not unconvinced. Talk to your dad, Lena said. He misses you being in the studio on Saturdays too, I bet. He never says stuff like that. He doesn't have to say it, Lena said. You know how to watch people before you decide. You already know. Sophie was quiet. Then, yeah, okay. They said goodbye. Sophie hung up with the abruptness of a child ending a call when the call had done what it needed to do. Lena held the phone for a long time after, sitting in the quiet shop with the inventory half done and the cold case humming and the streetlights coming through the window. She thought about 7 years old and about watching people before deciding, and about a stick figure drawn on a wall with a flower in its hand before anyone had discussed whether that was the right thing to draw. She thought about the gold seams in the clay pot, and the skylight and the sample flowers moved to the windowsill. She was not okay. She was also not broken. There was a difference, and she held on to it with both hands the way you hold on to something small that is nonetheless exactly the right shape to hold on to. She went back to her inventory. She finished it. She turned off the lights. She drove home through the April night and let herself feel, without managing it or cataloging it or making it practical, all of it. The missing and the distance, and the choice she'd made, and the gold-threaded certainty that some things broke in ways that were not the end of the story. Just not the end. April moved through the city the way it always did. In fits, 2 warm days followed by a cold snap, rain that couldn't decide if it wanted to commit, the trees on Lena's block going from bare to tentatively green over the course of 2 weeks in a way that felt both gradual and sudden when you finally noticed it. She noticed it on a Thursday morning, loading the van before 6, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment with a box of ranunculus in her arms, looking at the tree outside her building. The branches had gone soft and green overnight, or seemed to have, the kind of change that had actually been happening incrementally for days and only registered all at once. She put the flowers in the van and drove to the wholesale market and did not think about skylight rooms or sample flowers moved to a windowsill. She had gotten fairly good at not thinking about specific things. It was a skill, like any other. You got better at it with repetition, and you were never completely perfect at it, and some mornings were worse than others. The shop was doing all right. The April wedding had gone well. A garden ceremony in Brooklyn that had used more of her time than the contract covered, but had produced a result she was proud of. The kind of arrangement that made the bride cry for reasons that had nothing to do with sentiment and everything to do with the flowers being exactly right. The bride's mother had taken Lena's card and said she was sending it to her niece who was getting married in September, which was how the shop had always grown. One person, one event, one arrangement that said something true. Pedro was working 4 days again, which was a relief. Lena had been covering too many mornings alone, and she was 30 years old, and her back had started to let her know, with increasing specificity, that loading wholesale boxes before sunrise was a young person's activity, and she was edging toward the boundary of young. "You should hire someone else," Pedro said one afternoon, watching her ice down a shipment of peonies with the expression of a person observing someone being unnecessarily difficult about a simple problem. "I will when I can afford to," she said. "You're turning down orders," he said. "I've seen the inquiry emails you don't answer. You can't fulfill them, so you ignore them. But if you had another person—" "Pedro, I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying." She kept moving peonies. "I'm working on it." She was, actually. The April wedding had produced 2 referrals. A small hotel in the neighborhood had inquired about a weekly lobby arrangement contract, smaller than the foundation contract but real and without the complications. She was doing the math on whether she could cover a part-time hire by June if both the hotel contract and a second wedding referral came through. The math was close. Not comfortable, but close. The story in the Chronicle had shrunk to nothing within a month, the way these things did when the material ran out. Mercer Capital's PR campaign had shifted to a different approach, something involving a city planning board application and a rival community group they'd apparently funded, which was the foundation's legal team's problem now and not hers. The board's confidence had stabilized. The donor who'd threatened to pull out had stayed. She knew this because Marcus called her still, once a week, not with updates about Ethan specifically. Marcus was too professional for that, and she suspected Ethan had not asked him to do it. But with foundation news, general updates, The kind of information that kept her tethered to the work she'd done without requiring anything of her directly. She appreciated it more than she said. She did not call Ethan. He did not call her. This was, she had decided, correct. They had agreed, without discussing it, on a distance. Not a disappearance, but a space. The kind of space you give something that needs to settle before you look at it again. She had told him what wasn't happening in the conference room that March afternoon. She had not told him what was happening because some things needed time before they had a grammar that could be said out loud. Sophie had told Ethan about the phone call, as Lena had asked her to. Ethan had texted Lena the next morning, just 2 lines. She told me, "Thank you for talking to her." Lena had texted back, "She's a good kid." He had replied, "Yeah." And that had been the whole conversation. And she had read it over more times than was reasonable and told herself this was fine. This was the shape of it right now. This was what she had asked for. She was in the back room cutting dahlias on a Tuesday evening in late April when the door opened. She heard the chime and called out, "We're closing in 10 minutes," without looking up. "I know," said a voice that was not a customer. She turned. Ethan's sister Rachel was standing in the doorway of the back room, looking around with the interested, assessing expression of someone who had heard about a place and was now comparing it to the internal image she'd built. Rachel Calloway was 40, 5 years older than Ethan, and looked like someone who had come from the same stock and taken a different path through it. She was a pediatric cardiologist. She had the particular combination of warmth and precision that some doctors developed when they were good at both parts of the job, the medical part and the human part. She was, from everything Lena had gathered through Sophie's casual references, the person Ethan was closest to after Sophie herself. Lena had met her exactly once, briefly, at the March Gala. They had shaken hands and exchanged 14 words. "You're Ethan's sister," Lena said. "Yes." Rachel looked at the dahlias on the table. "Those are beautiful." "Thank you. What are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood." She said it with the tone of someone who knew she wasn't going to be believed and wasn't particularly trying to be. "You live in Tribeca," Lena said. "This is Brooklyn." "I was in a general southerly direction," Rachel said. "Can I sit down?" Lena gestured at the stool by the cold case. Rachel sat on it with the ease of someone not concerned about looking dignified. "I'm not here because Ethan asked me to come," Rachel said. "He doesn't know I'm here. I want to be clear about that before you throw me out." "I wasn't going to throw you out. I wasn't sure." Rachel looked at her hands for a moment. "I've been wanting to talk to you since March. I kept deciding against it because it's not my situation, and my instinct to manage things is a professional hazard that I work on." She looked up. "But it's been 6 weeks, and he's not getting better, and I'm a doctor, and watching someone get worse when there's an obvious treatment is physically uncomfortable for me." Lena set down her shears. "Worse how?" she said. Not a question exactly. More like a word placed carefully to see what came back. "He's working 18-hour days," Rachel said, "which he does in a crisis, so that's not new, but he's working them the way he did the year after Claire. Not productive, just busy. Movement instead of progress. Sophie told me last week that he made her cereal for dinner on Wednesday and then apologized 4 times, which is not a Ethan thing. Ethan undercooks feelings. He doesn't overcook them." She paused. "He also moved the sample flowers you left in the studio to the windowsill and has not once mentioned doing so, which is how I know we're in serious territory." Lena looked at the dahlias on the table. "I'm not sure what you want me to do with that," she said. "I'm not sure either," Rachel admitted. "I'm a fixer. I came here because I needed to do something, and talking to you was the thing I could do." She looked around the back room again. The workbench, the cold cases, the walls with their pegboard and hanging tools, the small jar by the register with the first $20 the shop had ever made. "He told me about this place," she said. "He described it pretty accurately, which means he paid attention." "He pays attention to things," Lena said. "He does. He's actually remarkably good at it for someone who seems like he'd be bad at it." Rachel looked at her. "He told me what you said in the conference room, about removing yourself so the foundation would have time." "It worked," Lena said. "The story shrunk. The board stabilized." "Yes, the institutional crisis was averted." Rachel's voice was dry but not unkind. The personal one is still in progress. Lena was quiet. I'm not here to push you toward anything, Rachel said. I genuinely mean that. Whatever's complicated is complicated, and that's real, and I'm not going to pretend the gap between his life and yours is imaginary, because it isn't. She paused. But I've watched my brother be alone in that apartment with that kid for 3 years, and I've watched him be very disciplined about not wanting things because wanting things after Claire felt like a betrayal he didn't know how to navigate. And then you walked into his office with flowers you weren't supposed to be delivering, and the first thing he did when I saw him the next week was tell me about a woman who talked about kintsugi. She stopped. He hasn't mentioned a woman to me in 3 years, Lena. Not once. The back room was very quiet. Outside, the street sounds of Brooklyn continued. A car, someone's voice, the specific rhythm of a city that never fully quieted, but that had its own versions of peace in the pauses between sounds. I know, Lena said finally. Her voice came out slightly rougher than she intended. I'm going to go, Rachel said. She stood from the stool. I shouldn't have come. I'm going to spend the drive back to Tribeca arguing with myself about whether this was a good idea, and I'll probably conclude it wasn't. It was, Lena said. Rachel looked at her. It was a good idea, Lena said. I just don't know what to do with it yet. Rachel nodded. She moved toward the door, then stopped. Sophie drew another picture this week, she said. She didn't put it on the wall. She put it in her desk drawer. Ethan found it when he was looking for her permission slip for the school trip. A pause. Same 4 figures, except this time she drew the flower lady with a flower shop in the background. Lena said nothing. The door to the shop is open in the drawing, Rachel said. I just thought you should know. She left. The door chimed. The shop was empty. Lena stood in the back room with the dahlias on the table and the cold cases humming and the image of a drawing with an open door. And she thought about a 7-year-old who put things in desk drawers when she wasn't sure whether to put them on walls yet. The version of hope that doesn't commit itself entirely to a wall because it's still watching, still deciding. She thought about timing. Her mother had talked about it. Flowers understood something about timing that people spent their whole lives trying to learn. The hellebore bloomed through frost. The peony came in late spring and not before, and you couldn't hurry it without damaging what it was going to be. She went home. She did not sleep especially well. She lay in the dark and thought about what she knew and what she didn't know, and what she'd been waiting for without being entirely sure she was waiting for it. By morning, she had decided, not impulsively. She had never made decisions impulsively. It wasn't in her nature. She made decisions the way she made arrangements, with a clear understanding of what the space required, what she was working with, and what the thing was supposed to say when it was done. She called Marcus at 8:30. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer me directly, not diplomatically. I'll try, Marcus said. Has the Foundation's board made any formal decision about reopening the vendor contract? A pause. The board voted 2 weeks ago to clear the contract of all irregularity findings. The internal review concluded that the procurement process was fully compliant. Another pause. Mr. Calloway has not yet reached out to you about reinstating the arrangement. I don't know whether he intends to. He's waiting, Lena said. I believe so, Marcus said carefully. Yes. For what? I think, Marcus said in the measured tone of someone choosing each word, for some indication that reinstating the professional arrangement would be welcome. Lena looked at her kitchen window. The tree outside her building was fully green now, fully committed to the season it had been approaching for weeks. Thank you, Marcus, she said. Ms. Harper. Lena. Lena. He said her name with a warmth she hadn't heard from him before, underneath all the professional scaffolding. It's good to hear your voice. She hung up and sat at her kitchen table for exactly 12 minutes, which she knew because she watched the clock. And then she got up and went to the shop and did the morning the way she always did. Loading, trimming, opening. And at 2 o'clock, she closed the shop 3 hours early and left Pedro in charge and drove uptown. She didn't call first. She'd thought about calling and decided against it. Calling gave him time to compose the version of himself he showed the world, and she didn't want that version. She'd had enough conversations with that version. She wanted the other one, the corporate building, 44th floor. Not the wrong floor this time. She knew exactly where she was going. The elevator opened on 44 and she walked down the corridor to 404, where the Callaway Group's main suite was. Not the law firm 2 doors down. Not the office where she'd first walked into a room she wasn't supposed to be in, with a man on the floor holding broken pieces of something small. The right room. The one with Marcus at the front desk, who looked up when she came in, and whose expression shifted in a way that told her he'd been expecting something like this, not in the details, but in the general shape of it. "He's in," Marcus said. "Give me a moment." "Don't announce me," she said. Marcus looked at her. "Please," she said. He looked at his desk. Then he stood and walked around it and opened the door to the inner office and held it for her without a word. Ethan was at his desk. He had the jacket off, sleeves rolled, the version of him that existed when he'd been in a room alone for long enough to stop performing the formal arrangement of himself. He was looking at something on his tablet and had not looked up at the sound of the door. He was used to Marcus's comings and goings, the particular pattern of that sound, and this was Marcus's rhythm, so his brain hadn't flagged it as different. Then he looked up. He went very still. She stood in the doorway with her coat on and her bag over her shoulder and the late April light coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind his desk, and she looked at him, looking at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. On the corner of his desk, she saw it. The clay pot. Gold-seamed, lopsided, exactly as it had been, except it had been moved. It was in the center of the desk now, not pushed to the corner behind the folders, front and center, fully present. "You moved it," she said. He looked at where she was looking. "Few weeks ago." His voice had the roughness again, the unpolished version. Marcus kept putting folders in front of it. He was probably trying to be protective. Probably. Ethan set the tablet down. "Lena." "The board cleared the contract," she said. "I know. I heard you haven't reached out about reinstating it." "I know." "Why?" He stood from the desk, not quickly, with the deliberateness of someone deciding to occupy a different position, physically and otherwise. "Because I wasn't going to reach out about the contract and have you think that was all I was reaching out about," he said. "And I wasn't ready to reach out about the other thing until I knew what I wanted to say." "And now?" He looked at her across the office. The distance between them was maybe 20 feet. A conference table's length, the width of a room that had seen a lot of significant things said and unsaid. "I have to show you something," he said. She hadn't expected that. He moved around the desk and past her into the outer office, where Marcus appeared to have developed a sudden deep interest in something on the far side of the room. Ethan went to a filing cabinet and opened the bottom drawer and came back with a folder that was thicker than a routine document file. "Sit down," he said. They sat at the small table near the window. Not the big conference table, the smaller one he used for working meetings, where the city was visible in all directions through the glass. He put the folder on the table and opened it. It was not a contract. It was a set of organizational documents, legal filings, board meeting minutes, a trust instrument, something from the state attorney general's office. She looked at the dates on the documents as he spread them out. September, October, November, before the gala, before the Chronicle piece, before any of it. "What is this?" she said. "The Foundation's new governance structure," he said. "I transferred operational control to an independent board in October. Full independence. Financial decisions, programmatic decisions, vendor contracts. I retained a seat as a non-voting founding member." He pointed to a specific page. "This was filed October 14th. October 14th was 2 weeks before she delivered the first standalone arrangement to the Foundation's main building. 6 weeks before the gala planning had begun in the studio." "You did this before," she said slowly. "Before the contract scope expanded. Before the studio." He turned to another document. "And this." He put a single page in front of her. A board resolution, dated November 3rd, listing the names of 5 incoming trustees for the Foundation's next governance cycle. She read down the list. Her name was 4th, Lena Harper, Harper and Bloom, Brooklyn, New York. Appointed as trustee pending acceptance. She looked up at him. "November 3rd, she said. "The week after your first studio visit. he said. The board had been discussing expanding the trustee structure for the fall. More community voices, people with direct ties to the sectors the foundation serves. I recommended you. He paused. Not because of the contract, not because of anything personal, because I'd watched you work and I'd heard you talk about what flowers were supposed to do in a room, and I thought, she understands what things are for, not what things cost, not what things look like, what they're for. He stopped. I've spent 3 years building an organization full of people who understand strategy. I don't have enough people who understand what things are for. Lena looked at her name on the document, then at the date, November 3rd, before the gala, before the Chronicle piece, before the conference room in March and the choice she'd made and the 6 weeks of distance and Rachel showing up in the back of her shop on a Tuesday evening with a story about a drawing in a desk drawer. Before everything that had felt like evidence of the gap between her world and his, there was a document dated November 3rd with her name on it, placed there by someone who had looked at her work and decided she belonged at the table. Not as a vendor, not as a contract, but as a voice. You never told me, she said. No. Why? Because I didn't want you to think it was... He stopped. Started again. Because the trustee appointment and the personal feelings were happening at the same time in the same brain, and I didn't want you to have to sort out which was which. I didn't want you sitting across that table in the studio wondering if I'd given you a board seat because I cared about you or because you deserved it. He met her eyes. You deserved it. That was the only reason for the document. Everything else was mine to manage. She sat with that. She thought about November, the first deliveries, the studio, the late night in December over bad coffee, and the story about her mother stranded on the highway with 60 stems of delphinium. She thought about him looking up the difference between hellebores and anemones on his phone and being embarrassed about it, and Sophie at the work table with her water-wet wrists asking why you cut the stems at an angle. She thought about the Chronicle article and the conference room and herself making the decision to leave before anyone could make her leave, the version of pride that disguised itself as practicality, and how she had sat in the van afterward thinking she was protecting him, and how that was true, and how it was also incomplete. She had left without knowing what he'd already built. I thought I was a liability, she said. I know. I thought the story they were telling was... She stopped. I thought I was the problem to be managed. I know what you thought. His voice was quiet, not reproachful, something else. I should have told you in October. I kept thinking there was a right time, and the right time kept not arriving, and then the story broke and you resigned before I could... He stopped. I handled it wrong. I handled it wrong too, she said. I went to the board before I came to you. Yeah. I was afraid if I came to you first, I wouldn't be able to make myself go. The city light came through the windows and sat on the table between them, on the documents with her name on them, on the terracotta pot with its gold seams on the corner of the desk. The contract, she said. The trustee appointment. Those are... She looked for the word. Those are professional things, real things. I'm not confused about that. No, he said. They are. And the other thing is separate. Yes. But it's also real, she said. Yes, he said. It's also real. She looked at him. He was watching her with the full, unmanaged version of attention she'd seen pieces of over 6 months. In the studio, in the back room of the foundation on December nights, in the conference room when he'd said, I just knew I wanted you in that room. The version he didn't show the people he was performing competence for, the version that had been working on her since November, and that she had been sensibly, practically, logically refusing to fully receive because of all the sensible, practical, logical reasons to be careful. She was done being careful. She had been careful enough. She had been careful all the way through a departure that had cost both of them 6 weeks, and careful had not, it turned out, protected her from any of the things she'd been afraid of. It had just delayed them. I owe you an apology, he said. For what specifically? For not telling you about the trustee appointment. For letting you walk into that conference room without the full picture. He paused. For saying you didn't trust me in being right, but not acknowledging that I'd given you incomplete information. You weren't wrong, she said. I didn't trust you fully. I gave you reason not to. And I gave you reason, she said. I went to the board before I came to you. That wasn't just self-protection. It was also, I was afraid of what you'd say if I gave you the chance to say it. He looked at her. What was I going to say? Something that would have made it harder to leave. She looked at the table. You would have said the right thing. You're good at saying the right thing when it matters, and I needed to be able to go without the right thing being in my way. A silence. Lena, he said. She looked up. What you did? He paused, finding the words, not rushing them. Walking out of that room so the foundation wouldn't have to choose between you and the properties in the Bronx. I was angry about it. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't. I'm still... He stopped. The anger isn't at you. The anger is at the situation, at the fact that you had to make that choice. He looked at his hands. The communities those centers serve, families who don't have anywhere else to go, those people are still housed because of what you did. I know that. And I hate that it cost you. It cost me 6 weeks, she said. Those families have whole lives at stake. That's not a hard calculation. It is, though, he said. It shouldn't have been yours to make. It was available to me and I made it. She looked at him directly. That's what you do with the tools you have. He was quiet for a moment. Your mother would have liked that sentence, he said. She would have put it better. Lena almost smiled. She'd have made it about flowers somehow. She usually did, from what you've told me. Constantly. It was mildly exhausting and I miss it every day. He looked at her with the expression that she'd spent 6 months cataloging in pieces and had now seen assembled, all of it at once, the watchfulness and the warmth and the grief and the wanting and the particular quality of attention he directed at very few things, and that landed on her like something she hadn't known she needed until it was pointed at her. Sophie called you, he said, from the landline. She told you? She told me that night. His voice was somewhere between exasperated and awed. She said she called to ask about a staffing situation and that she found the number herself on the website. That's an accurate summary. She's 7. She's a problem solver, Lena said. She identified a gap in the communication and addressed it. She's too much like me. Is that a complaint? No, he said. He almost smiled. Almost. The version she'd learned to read, the one that was real precisely because it didn't quite arrive. She also told me what you said, about the flowers still growing. He paused. She taped the drawing to the wall the next morning, the one she'd had in the drawer. Lena looked at the table, felt something behind her sternum that she was not going to manage or catalog or make practical. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes? What did you want to say when you said you weren't ready to reach out until you knew what you wanted to say? He was quiet for a moment. I wanted to say that I spent 3 years after Claire thinking that what I needed to do was protect Sophie from another loss. Keep things small and contained. Not reach for anything I couldn't guarantee. He looked at the clay pot on the desk. I wanted to say that I've been doing that, and I think I've been wrong about it. Not about protecting her. I'll never stop doing that. But about what protection looks like. He paused. You told Sophie the flowers keep growing even when they're not in the shop. She put the drawing on the wall because of that sentence. A 7-year-old understood that the risk of wanting something is not sufficient reason to not want it. She's smarter than both of us, Lena said, demonstrably. He looked at her. I wanted to say that I've been keeping you at a professional distance since October because it was what I thought I was supposed to do, and that 6 weeks without you in the building has made it very clear that the professional distance was mostly performing sensibility for an audience of 1. He stopped. I wanted to say that I'm 32 years old and I'm in love with you, which is either very simple or very complicated, depending on which part of it you look at, and I'm tired of looking at the complicated part as the primary fact. The city spread out through the windows in every direction. The afternoon light was the good kind. Not the punishing bright of noon, but the particular gold of late afternoon in spring. The light that made things look the way they actually were rather than the way they were supposed to appear. Lena sat with what he'd said. She didn't have the impulse to manage it or make it practical or find the careful version. She sat with it the way you sit with something you've been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. and that turns out to be exactly the size and shape you would have chosen if anyone had asked. I've been in love with you since December, she said, when you said you needed somewhere to be and came to the foundation building late, and we stayed up talking about your mother and my mother and cats and cereal. She paused. I told myself approximately 47 times between then and March that it was a bad idea. Was it? He said. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Ask me in a year. He looked at her for a moment, then he said, Lena, what do you actually want? It was the question, she realized, that nobody had asked her in a very long time. Not the what do you need version, not the what would be reasonable version, but the actual plain question about actual plain wanting. I want to come back to the studio, she said. I want to do the trustee work properly, if the board still wants that. I want to bring Sophie flowers on Saturdays and teach her things about them until she knows more than I do, which I give her about 2 years. She paused. And I want to see where the other thing goes without spending the whole time being careful about it. The other thing, he said, you and me, in the same room, without the professional arrangement as the only reason. That's what I want, he said, without a distance between us built out of everyone else's story. She nodded. He nodded. It was not a resolution of everything complicated. She was still a florist from Brooklyn, and he was still a billionaire on the 44th floor, and the gap between those things had not been dissolved by 6 months of studios and Saturdays and a conversation about clay pots. It was still there. It would require navigation and honesty and regular maintenance, the way anything real did. But it was the honest version of where they were, and the honest version was the only one she was interested in building from. She stood. He stood. They were on the same side of the table now, with the city light coming through the windows, and the pot with its gold seams on the desk corner, and 20 feet of office between them that had become, over 6 months of wrong floors and right rooms, the particular territory of two people learning each other. He crossed the 20 feet. She didn't move away. He put one hand against her face while, careful, the specific carefulness of someone who had been holding things gently for a long time and knew how. She put her hand over his and held it there, both of them standing in the afternoon light of a city that had never once stopped moving below them. I should have come back sooner, she said. You came back when you came back, he said. That's how it goes. My mother would say flowers come up when they come up. She'd be right. She was usually right. Lena looked at him. She drove 4 hours for Delphinium, you know. She never once thought it wasn't worth the trip. He looked at her with the full assembled version of his expression, all of it, the parts she'd learned over months, and the new ones she was only now being allowed to see. No, he said, it never wasn't worth the trip. She exhaled something she'd been holding, not just since March, but since November, maybe since the morning she'd stood on a sidewalk looking at her van and told herself it was nothing, told herself she was practical and careful and too busy for whatever was trying to happen. It had happened anyway. Things did, when they were ready. You couldn't hurry the peony or the hellebore or the particular convergence of two lives moving toward each other by degrees so gradual you almost didn't notice until you looked up and found yourself somewhere you hadn't planned to be, somewhere that turned out to be exactly where you were supposed to be, which was the most disorienting and the most honest kind of arrival there was. Later, after, when the afternoon had given way to early evening and they were sitting at that small table with takeout containers Marcus had ordered without being asked, she looked at the clay pot in the fading light. Can I ask you something? She said. You always ask that before you ask. Old habit. She looked at the pot. What would you have done if it couldn't be repaired? After the bracket gave out? If the pieces were too small? He thought about it, which she appreciated. The genuine consideration, not the quick reassuring answer. I don't know, he said. I'd kept it 3 years without breaking it. I think I would have... He stopped. I think I would have found it very hard to decide what to do next. But you would have decided. Yeah. He looked at it. Eventually. That's enough, she said. He looked at her. That you would have decided eventually, she said. That's enough. That's the whole thing, actually. Just being willing to decide eventually. Most people never get there. He was quiet for a moment. Then, is that what you've been doing? Deciding eventually? I've been deciding for about 6 months, she said. I got there. The evening came into the office through the city windows. The particular New York dark that was never fully dark, lit from below by a million different reasons for light. They sat with the takeout containers and the pot and the foundation documents spread across the small table, and it was not a neat or organized thing, the life arriving in pieces around them, the future visible only in the specific shapes they were willing to build toward. But it was real, and it was theirs, and the honest version was the only one she'd ever been interested in. She picked up a container of fried rice and handed him the chopsticks and said, "Tell me about Sophie's winter showcase that her teacher called about in November. Did you go?" He took the chopsticks. "She made a ceramic bowl," he said. "It was lopsided on one side." Lena looked at him. "I know," he said. "What did you say?" "I said it was perfect." He paused. "She said I was lying." I said, "Okay, it's imperfect in the best possible way." She said that was just a fancier version of lying. He almost smiled. Then she ate 3 cookies and fell asleep in the car on the way home. "She's going to be fine," Lena said. "You both are." Yeah, he said. "We're working on it." She looked at the pot in the evening light, the gold lines catching the last of the day, the brakes repaired and visible and fully present, the whole thing heavier and more honest than it had been before it fell. That was the thing about kintsugi, she thought. The pot didn't look fixed. It looked repaired, which was different. It looked like something that had gone through something and come out the other side changed, carrying the evidence of what had happened as part of what it was now. She had told him that in November, the morning she walked into the wrong room. She hadn't known then that she was describing both of them. The morning Ethan showed up at Harper & Bloom before sunrise, Lena was already there. This was not unusual. She arrived at 5:30 most mornings, earlier when a big order was due, which this particular Thursday in May was, because she had a corporate event delivery at 8 and a wedding consultation at 10, and the hotel lobby contract she'd signed 3 weeks prior required fresh arrangements every Thursday by 9. She had gotten used to the dark of early morning in the shop, the way the cold cases hummed in the quiet, and the streetlights threw long rectangles through the front window, and the city outside was doing its pre-dawn version of itself, half asleep and honest about it. She heard the knock at 5:50 and thought it was Pedro, who sometimes came early when he knew the load was heavy, and she went to the front door with a bucket of peonies in her arms and pulled it open. Ethan was standing on the sidewalk in a jacket that was not quite warm enough for a May morning at this hour, holding 2 paper cups of coffee from the place 3 blocks away that opened at 5:45. She stared at him. "Marcus mentioned the Thursday schedule," he said. "I thought you could use the coffee." "Marcus mentioned it," she repeated. "He keeps my calendar. Keeping yours wasn't a significant additional burden." She stepped back from the door. He came in. This was the 3rd week of what she had not yet named. The version of things that existed after the afternoon in the 44th floor office with the takeout containers and the foundation documents and his hand against her face and the city going dark through the windows. She was still working out the grammar of it, the way you work out the grammar of a language you've been learning for months and suddenly find yourself speaking without translating first. It was not simple. She had not expected simple, and simple had not arrived. What had arrived was something that required navigation. His schedule and hers, the tower on the Upper East Side and the shop in Brooklyn, the board meetings she now attended as a foundation trustee, and the 5:30 mornings that were the opposite end of the day from everything in his professional life. It was not a fairy tale version of things. It was the real version, which had friction and logistics and the specific comedy of 2 people from different ends of the same city trying to find the rhythms of each other. But he was here at 5:50 with coffee, which meant he had gotten up before 5 to make it across the bridge, which meant something she didn't need to overthink. "The peonies go in the left case," she said. "If you're staying." He took off his jacket. "Tell me what to do." "Have you ever worked in a flower shop?" "No." "Have you ever done manual labor before 7 a.m.? He thought about it. "Define manual." She handed him a bucket. "Fill this at the sink. Cold water, not warm. Cut stems drink better in cold." He took the bucket without complaint and went to the sink, and she went back to the peonies, and they worked in the early morning quiet of the shop. her giving instructions and him following them with the focused competence of someone who knew how to learn things quickly when the thing was worth learning. He was not naturally graceful at it. He held the stems with slightly too much authority at first, the grip of someone accustomed to controlling things, and she had to tell him twice to ease off before he found the right touch. But he paid attention, which was the thing that mattered, and by 6:30 he had stripped lower leaves from 40 stems of garden roses without being asked a second time. "You're not bad at this," she said. "You sound surprised." "You run a billion-dollar company. People at your level usually aren't good at tasks that require patience and don't have a financial outcome." "I built a foundation," he said, "that requires patience and regularly has no financial outcome." "Fair point." She looked at his work. "The angles are still a little shallow. Cut steeper." "This steep?" He adjusted. "More." He adjusted further. "There," she said. He looked at the stem, then at her. "You're a demanding teacher." "Sophie doesn't think so." "Sophie thinks you can do no wrong," he said. "She's developing an unfortunately uncritical admiration for you. She criticizes my color choices all the time. Last Saturday she told me the dusty rose and the coral were fighting each other." "Were they?" "Yes," Lena admitted. "She was right. I moved the coral." He almost smiled. The almost smile had become one of her favorite things about him. The version that was real precisely because it was still becoming, not yet arrived, the expression caught in the honest moment before composure settled over it. "She wants to know," he said, working a stem through careful fingers, "if she can have a job here this summer. A real job, not a learning exercise." She was very specific about the distinction. "She's 8. She turned 8 in March. She believes this is relevant to her professional readiness." Lena looked at the peonies, at the roses he'd stripped, at the man in his good jacket at her work table at 6:30 in the morning, doing the small and patient work of the flower trade with the same seriousness he applied to foundation governance. "Tell her she can come 2 Saturdays a month," Lena said. "She helps with prep and she learns one new thing each time. No pay yet. She's in the apprenticeship phase." "She's going to negotiate," he said. "She can try." "She's going to win." "Probably," Lena said, "but she has to try first." Pedro arrived at 6:45, stopped in the doorway, looked at Ethan with an expression that moved rapidly through surprise, recognition, and careful neutrality, and then said, "Morning," with the studied evenness of someone who had been briefed on the general situation by Dana, who had been briefed on it by Lena, and who was choosing to be professional about it. "Pedro," Ethan said, with a nod that acknowledged the awkwardness and declined to dwell on it. "Those roses look good," Pedro said to Ethan, with the specific respect of one professional to another. "She made me do them over twice," Ethan said. "Yeah, she does that," Pedro said. He picked up a bucket and went to the cold case, and the morning continued. The corporate delivery went out at 7:50. Lena and Pedro loading the van with the efficiency of people who had done the same choreography enough times to stop thinking about it. Ethan helped carry boxes without being asked, and she did not say anything about this, and he did not make a thing of it, which was the correct approach from both of them. She drove the delivery alone. Pedro had a second-order pickup at 8:15, and Ethan said he'd wait at the shop, which she had not asked him to do but did not object to. When she came back at 8:40, he was drinking his second coffee and reading something on his phone and had, she noticed, swept the back room floor, which nobody had swept since Tuesday. "You didn't have to sweep," she said. "It needed sweeping." "You swept my floor." "It's a skill that doesn't require previous experience," he said, without looking up from his phone. "Most things are learnable." She looked at him sitting in the back room of her shop in his good jacket, with a broom leaning against the wall behind him, and the floor clean and the morning coming through the window, and she thought about November. The wrong floor, the broken pot, the man sitting in the middle of his very large and very powerful life, holding the pieces of something small that he couldn't fix himself. He had changed. She had changed. Maybe that wasn't the right word. Revealed was closer, the way something reveals itself over time rather than changing, like a plant that has been growing underground for a season, and then one day you look at the soil and see it coming through. "Ethan," she said. "Thank you for the coffee." He looked up. He looked at her the way he looked at her now, directly. Without the managed distance he'd used for the first several months, the full version of his attention that she'd learned was not something he gave casually. "Thank you for letting me in," he said. She understood he was not talking about the shop door. She went to put her bag down and start the setup for the 10 o'clock consultation, and the morning continued. The Mercer Capital situation resolved in May. It resolved not with drama, but with the specific deflation of a campaign that had run out of pressure. The City Planning Board denied their application for rezoning of the South Bronx properties. The denial came on a Tuesday, and the Foundation's legal team sent a one-paragraph email to the board and the staff saying the application had been rejected and the properties were secure. The community resource centers would continue operating. The housing programs would continue. The after-school programming that Sophie had once made Lena a drawing about, a stick figure building, small windows, children-sized figures going in and out, would continue. Lena read the email at the shop and then called Marcus, because she still called Marcus when she needed Foundation news delivered with precision. "What happened?" she said. "The planning board received 47 letters from community members, program participants, and partner organizations during the public comment period," Marcus said. The Foundation's legal record on the properties was clean. The board voted 6-1 against the rezoning. 47 letters, Lena said. The community organizer on the program staff coordinated the campaign, Marcus said. She started it in February. The letters arrived through March and April. He paused. She told me she started it after the gala in March, after seeing the Foundation's work presented in a room full of people who believed in it. She said it made her realize the community's voice was the one they'd been missing. Lena was quiet. The gala she had spent 3 months planning, the room full of hellebores and silver runners, and the story about things that bloomed through frost. She had built that room to tell a story, and the story had apparently kept moving after the flowers were gone, had traveled into a community organizer who had come back to her neighborhood and started making phone calls, and 47 letters had landed on a planning board's desk in March and April, and the resource centers were secure. Flowers did that. Her mother had said so. Flowers are worth the trouble. People are worth the trouble. She had said it from a highway shoulder in New Jersey surrounded by 60 stems of delphinium, stranded and somehow not worried, because she'd understood something about the cumulative weight of things worth doing, even when they were inconvenient. Tell the community organizer, Lena said, that she should come to the next trustee meeting. I want to hear from her directly. I'll pass it on, Marcus said. She hung up and went back to the cold case and thought about chains of consequence. One woman driving 4 hours for flowers, one greenhouse in Connecticut, one conversation about kintsugi in a room she wasn't supposed to be in, one gala full of frost-blooming things, one community organizer with a phone and a list of neighbors, 47 letters, 2 resource centers still standing. None of it had been the direct path. None of it had been planned the way you plan a corporate strategy. It had been the cumulative weight of things done honestly, one after another, until the weight added up to something nobody could move. She thought that was how most things that mattered actually worked. The clean line between cause and effect was the story you told afterward. The real thing was messier and slower, and full of detours. A florist delivering to the wrong floor, a bracket giving out, a broken pot, gold in the cracks. Mercer Capital redirected its attention to a commercial property in Queens. Warren Giles, the board member who had called for the contract review, resigned from the board in June. Lena's trusteeship was formally ratified at the June board meeting, and she sat at the table in the Foundation's conference room and listened to the program reports, and the financial summaries, and the discussion of the fall grant cycle. And when she spoke, it was about what the programs were for and whether they were still for the right things, and people listened, and she understood that this was what he had seen in November. Not a florist who had good instincts about rooms, but a person who understood what things were for. She drove home from that board meeting and called Dana. How was it? Dana asked. Good, Lena said. Strange. Good strange. She drove through the evening traffic. I belong there. I know you do, Dana said. I've known that since you described what you do with flowers. You've always been making arguments, Lena. You just made them in arrangements. That's what my mother said, almost exactly. Your mother was right about most things. She was. Lena stopped at a light. I called her the other day. You... What? In my head, Lena said. I do it sometimes. I just, I was in the back of the shop, early morning, and I thought about what she would say about all of this. She paused. I think she'd say I took the long route. Did you? Yeah. She pulled through the green light. But I got there. June arrived with the specific generosity of New York summers before they turned punishing, warm and bright, and the parks full of people making optimistic use of good weather. The city softened slightly at the edges, the way it did when the temperature didn't require a person to be hostile to it, and even the subway platforms were bearable before 9 in the morning. Harper and Bloom's second location opened on June 8th. It was not large, a narrow storefront in a neighborhood on the Brooklyn-Queens border where the commercial rents were still within reach, and the foot traffic from 3 apartment buildings and a farmer's market on Saturdays made the math work. It had a cold case she'd bought used, a work table, a good wall of pegboard, and a small hand-painted sign in the window that said Harper and Bloom in the same lettering as the original, because some things shouldn't be changed just because they were multiplied. Pedro was managing the second location. She'd hired a part-time assistant named Jules, who was 25 and had a background in botanical illustration and a willingness to do wholesale pickups at 5:30 that suggested either genuine passion for the work or an unusual relationship with sleep. Lena split her time between both locations, and the splitting required organization that she had not previously needed, which meant a whiteboard in the back of the original shop and a shared scheduling system she'd set up with Marcus's help and a lot of early mornings that were earlier than her previously established early mornings. She was tired in a way that felt productive. There was a difference between the fatigue of survival, the exhausted, grinding November kind, and the fatigue of growth. She had been living in the first kind for so long that the second kind felt strange, almost suspicious, like a number that seemed too right when you checked the math. The foundation was expanding its programming, 3 new trustee-led initiatives in the fall, including a community garden project in the Bronx that had come directly out of a conversation she'd had with the community organizer at the June board meeting. The organizer's name was Bernice, and she had the particular directness of someone who had spent years translating between community needs and institutional language, and she and Lena had stayed 40 minutes after the meeting talking about what a community garden project actually needed versus what it said it needed. And by the end of it, Lena had sketched out a proposal on the back of a meeting agenda that Bernice had photographed on her phone before they left. "You're good at this," Bernice had said, in the same direct way that she said most things. "At what?" "At figuring out what the thing is actually for," she said. "A lot of people in these rooms know what things cost and what they look like. Not as many know what they're for." Lena had heard that before, in different words, from a different voice. "I had a good teacher," she said. The Saturdays with Sophie continued through June, and Sophie had, as Ethan had predicted, negotiated her apprenticeship terms. She had presented a handwritten list of her qualifications at the beginning of June. It included, "I know all the names of the flowers we worked on, and I am careful with scissors," and at the bottom in slightly larger letters, "I will work very hard." And Lena had looked at the list for a moment and then said she could come every Saturday in June and July. And Sophie had shaken her hand with the gravity of a person closing a business deal, which was either something she'd learned from watching Ethan or something she'd invented entirely herself. On the first Saturday of June, Sophie arrived at the new location for the first time and walked through it with the same focused assessment she applied to everything. And when she was done, she stood in the center of the room and said, "It needs something on that wall." She pointed at the long wall opposite the cold case, bare white paint, the kind of blankness that a room develops when it's new and hasn't figured out what it's for yet. "I know," Lena said. "I haven't decided what to put there." Sophie looked at the wall for a long moment. Then she said, "I could paint it." Lena looked at her. "You paint?" "Grandma Claire's room has paints," Sophie said. "Dad let me use them last month. I'm not as good as she was, but I'm learning." She looked at the wall. "I could do flowers, big ones, the kind that take up the whole space." Lena was quiet. She thought about the studio on the 32nd floor, with its skylight and its shelves of Claire's supplies, and the unfinished canvas on the easel in the corner that neither of them had looked at directly for months. She thought about a room being used, She thought about Sophie at 7, at 8 now, corrected, saying rooms should be used with the authority of a child repeating wisdom she had absorbed through the walls of her life. Talk to your dad, Lena said. If he's okay with the paints, you can do the wall. Sophie had already taken out her phone, a basic one she'd gotten for her birthday, that she used primarily to photograph flowers, and text Lena pictures of things she found interesting, and was texting. A minute later, her phone buzzed. She looked at it, looked at the wall, looked at Lena. He said yes, she said. He said to tell you he already taught her how to clean the brushes so you don't have to worry about that. He taught you how to clean brushes? We've been going to the studio on Wednesday evenings, Sophie said, in the casual tone of someone mentioning something that was ongoing and settled. We look at Mama's paintings and I ask him questions about them, and sometimes we use the paints. He's not very good, but he's getting better. Lena absorbed this. Ethan Calloway, who ran a foundation and a corporation and managed board meetings in rival capital firms and the weight of grief with a control that was part genuine competence and part defensive architecture. Ethan Calloway was in his late wife's studio on Wednesday evenings, learning to use her paints with their 8-year-old daughter, getting better. She thought about the unfinished canvas on the easel. She had been careful never to ask about it directly. She had understood it was the thing in the room that needed to be approached on its own terms, in its own time, and that none of her business was deciding when that time was. Sophie, she said carefully, the canvas on the easel, the one your mom left. We finished it, Sophie said, simply. Dad and me. We talked about what she probably would have done with the blue part, and we finished it together. It took 3 Wednesdays. She looked up from her phone. It's hanging in the living room now, over the couch. She paused. It looks good. It's kind of ours now, too. Lena put both hands on the work table. She thought about a man who had kept a closed door for 3 years and had, at some point between November and June, opened it not because the grief had gone away, but because he had found, in the slow accumulation of Saturdays and studios and coffee before sunrise, and an honest conversation in an office with a pot on the desk, a way to carry it differently, to let it be part of what was there rather than a door he was managing. She thought about Sophie, 8 years old, who had asked questions about the blue part and helped her father finish something her mother had started. She thought about kintsugi, not as a metaphor now, but as the actual fact of it, the thing itself. You didn't erase the cracks. You filled them with something valuable. The broken places became the story the object was telling. It looks good, she said. You should come see it, Sophie said. Come for dinner, Wednesday. Sophie, Dad makes pasta on Wednesdays. It's not very good, but it's okay. She looked at the wall with the particular determination of someone who has identified a project and is not going to be distracted from it. I'm going to do peonies on that wall. Big ones. Pink and white. Peonies are hard, Lena said. The layers. I know. That's why I want to do them. Sophie glanced at her. Hard things are more interesting. Lena looked at this 8-year-old with her fox backpack and her safety shears and her unshakable certainty about the things that mattered, and she thought, she is going to be something extraordinary. She's already something extraordinary. She just hasn't had enough years yet for the world to fully register it. Wednesday, Lena said. Tell him I'm coming. Sophie sent the text before Lena finished the sentence. The Wednesday dinner was pasta that was, as advertised, okay rather than good, slightly overcooked on one end because Ethan had gotten distracted by a work call and lost 3 minutes of attention on the sauce, and Sophie had compensated by adding cheese in quantities that exceeded what the recipe called for, and the result was something that tasted fine if you didn't think too hard about what it was trying to be. They ate at the kitchen table, Ethan, Lena, Sophie, with the city visible through the kitchen window and the evening light doing its particular late June thing, long and gold and in no hurry to leave. Sophie ate with one hand and talked with the other, explaining her wall plan to Lena in the detailed, uninterruptible way that 8-year-olds explain things they're excited about. She had done preliminary sketches. She had decided on the color sequence. She had thoughts about scale that she'd arrived at by looking at the wall and then holding her arm out to compare. She measured the wall with her arm, Ethan said to Lena, with the tone of a parent reporting a child's methodology with approximate neutrality. That's actually not a bad way to get relative scale, Lena said. Thank you, Sophie said to Ethan, with the satisfied expression of a person whose approach has been professionally validated. After dinner, Sophie went upstairs to do homework, and Lena and Ethan sat at the kitchen table with the remnants of the pasta and the remains of the evening light. And it was one of those moments that doesn't announce itself as significant, but that, while it's happening, you will remember. The specific quality of the light, the sound of Sophie's footsteps upstairs, the ordinary domestic wreckage of a shared meal. She's going to paint the whole wall, Ethan said. She's already bought the paint, with her savings. She has a savings account. She's been putting birthday money in it since she was 6. He looked at the ceiling with the expression of a father who is perpetually slightly outpaced by his child. She spent $43 on professional-grade acrylic. She did research on which brand. She's 8, Lena said. I know. He looked at her. She also told me this morning that she's decided she wants to be a florist when she grows up. She told me she wants to be a painter. She told me florist. She's covering her options, Lena said. She told Rachel she wants to be a cardiologist. Lena laughed. It came out of her fully, the kind of laugh that arrives when something is exactly the right combination of surprising and inevitable. And Ethan looked at her the way he looked at her when she laughed, like it was one of the things he had been paying attention to for months and hadn't gotten tired of yet. She's going to be whatever she decides, Lena said. She's that kind of person. She is, he said. She's been that kind of person since she was 3. Claire was like that. Decided things and then did them. He paused. I'm more of a circle the problem 3 times person. I know, Lena said. I've watched you do it. Is that frustrating? No. She looked at him across the table. It means when you finally decide you're sure that's worth the circling. He was quiet for a moment. I want to ask you something, he said. You never say that before you ask, she said. That's my thing. I'm borrowing it. He looked at the table, then at her. The Foundation's community garden project, the one from Bernice's proposal. We're planning to launch it in September in the Bronx. There's a lot of work to do between now and then, and I'd like you to lead the design component, not as a vendor, as a trustee with direct program oversight. He paused. You'd be working with Bernice, with the community liaison team, with the horticulture consultant we've brought on. It's a real leadership role. She looked at him. Is this because of us? She said. Not accusing, asking. No, he said. It's because you are the right person for it, and I'm done waiting for the right moment to offer you things you're right for because I'm worried about how it looks. He met her eyes. I've spent enough time worrying about how things look. I'd rather make good decisions and deal with the perception afterward. She looked at the table, at the pasta remnants, at the evening light. Yes, she said. Yes? I'll lead the design component. Yes. He nodded. Something in his shoulders settled slightly. The release of a person who had been holding a question at tension and has now been given an answer he can work with. Good, he said. You should have asked me sooner. I know. He looked at her. I'm working on the circling 3 times thing. Don't stop entirely, she said. It's part of how you make good decisions. Just faster. Somewhat faster. Upstairs, Sophie dropped something. A book, probably, the thud of something solid landing on hardwood, and they both looked at the ceiling simultaneously, the automatic parental attention to sound that she had been learning to have over months of Saturdays. Nothing followed the thud, no subsequent sounds of distress. She's fine, Ethan said. I know, Lena said. They sat with the evening getting dark through the kitchen window, and it was not a dramatic moment. No music, no announcement, no resolution that presented itself with fanfare. It was a kitchen table and cold pasta, and a man and a woman who had taken the long route to sitting here comfortably, both of them still imperfect and still navigating and still occasionally wrong about things, which was the real version of any life that was worth living. She thought about what she would have told herself in November, if she could have. Standing on the sidewalk outside the corporate building after the wrong floor delivery, telling herself it was nothing, telling herself she was practical and careful, and had no bandwidth for whatever was trying to begin. She wouldn't have told herself anything, she decided. You couldn't shortcut the learning. The circling 3 times was how you arrived at the real decision. The 6 weeks of distance was how she'd learned the difference between walking away and walking toward. The November through June was the work. And the work was the whole point, not the destination, but the actual substance of the thing. They were already there. They had been getting there for 8 months, one delivery at a time. The wedding was in September. Lena had told Ethan, when he asked, that she wanted something small. Not because small was easier or because she was uncertain. She was not uncertain. She had learned the hard way what uncertainty actually felt like, and this was not it. But because everything that mattered to her fit in a small room, and she had no interest in performing the event for an audience of people who weren't inside the actual story. The venue was the Foundation's courtyard garden, a space that had been renovated as part of the community development work with brick walls and late summer ivy and a small ornamental pear tree that turned orange gold in September. 40 people, close ones. Marcus, who had been the nervous structural support of the whole story without being in any of the scenes. Dana and her girlfriend, Rachel, who had shown up in Lena's back room in April and would spend the rest of her life being smug about it in the dignified, indirect way she did things. Bernice from the Foundation, who had not expected to be invited and who showed up with a wrapped gift and the expression of someone still calibrating what the invitation meant. Gloria Reeves, the board chair, who came because she had been in the middle of the story longer than most people knew. Sophie wore a dress that was slightly too big because Ethan had bought the next size up anticipating a growth spurt that hadn't fully arrived yet, and she had rolled the sleeves twice and declared the result acceptable. She had made the ceremony bouquets herself, with help, with Lena standing beside her at the work table on the Friday before and guiding her hands through the wiring, but Sophie had chosen the flowers and made the argument for each one and been right about most of it. Peonies, garden roses, a spray of dusty Miller running silver through the whole thing, anemones with their dark centers and their petals soft all the way to the edge, the flowers that bloom when everything else is done, that ask nothing of the season except to be allowed to open. Why anemones? Ethan had asked when Sophie showed him the plan. Because Lena explained them to me the first day I met her, Sophie said, and I remembered. She looked at him. Things you learn at the right time, you remember. He had looked at Lena over Sophie's head. She had looked back. The ceremony was short in the way that ceremonies are short when the people involved have already done the long work of choosing each other and need only to say it out loud in front of witnesses. A friend of Rachel's who was a licensed officiant came and did the thing without excessive ornamentation, and Ethan said what he said and Lena said what she said, and neither speech was polished, and both were true. Sophie stood beside Lena and held the bouquet and did not fidget, which Ethan noted later was a form of discipline she had never managed at school concerts, and which suggested she considered this event in a fundamentally different category from school concerts. When it was done, when the witnesses had witnessed and the papers were signed and the gathering had shifted from ceremony to meal, Sophie tugged Lena's sleeve. "You're my family now," she said. "Official." "I was your family before," Lena said. "The paperwork just caught up." Sophie considered this. "Like how the letters came in March and April," she said. "And the resource centers were always worth saving, but the letters made it official." Lena looked at this 9-year-old because Sophie had turned 9 in March this year, who had just drawn a structural analogy between a wedding and a planning board appeal. "Exactly like that," Lena said. Sophie nodded, satisfied, and went to find Rachel because she had promised to show her the anemone arrangement up close. Ethan appeared at Lena's elbow. He had the expression of a person who had just done something irreversible and was entirely at peace with it, which was a different expression from the one she'd cataloged through November and December and the long road to here. "Did she just compare our wedding to a community planning process?" he said. "She did," Lena said. "I don't know whether to be proud or concerned." "Be proud," Lena said. "She's right." He put his hand in hers, the same hand against her face in the April light of his office, the same careful grip of someone who had learned to hold things without losing them. She held it back. The courtyard garden was full of people and late September light, and the smell of the flowers Sophie had made, And somewhere in the middle of it, the foundation's community organizer was talking to the hotel manager who had given Lena the lobby contract, and Dana was explaining something animated to Gloria Reeves, who was listening with the expression of someone unexpectedly entertained, and Marcus was eating a small plate of food with the visible relief of a man who has spent 9 months facilitating other people's complicated lives and is glad to see them arriving somewhere. 1 year. November to September. The wrong floor to the right room, the broken pot to the gold-threaded one, the flower shop that was drowning to the second location opening in June. None of it was clean. None of it had been the direct route. There had been the Chronicle piece and the conference room and 6 weeks of distance and a bowl of overcooked pasta and 47 community letters and an 8-year-old savings account spent on professional-grade acrylic paint. Real things were made of real materials. You couldn't build anything honest out of easier ingredients. 1 year later, 1 year after that September wedding, the September of the year following, the new flower shop had the walls Sophie had painted. The peonies were big and layered and technically not perfect. There was a wobble in the left petal of the centermost bloom that Sophie, at now 10, considered a design choice, and they covered the full length of the wall in pink and white and soft green, and every person who came into the shop stopped when they saw it. Not because it was a masterpiece, because it was genuine, because you could see in the way the paint went down that the person who made it had cared about it more than they'd cared about being good at it, which was the thing that separated work that moved people from work that merely impressed them. Sophie came to the shop on Saturdays still. She was not an apprentice anymore. She had graduated herself by her own declaration to junior florist, a title Lena had neither confirmed nor denied, because the actual work Sophie did on Saturdays had outpaced the title anyway. She could build a hand-tied bouquet. She understood color temperature. She had opinions about filler flowers that were occasionally more interesting than Lena's. She had also decided in October that she wanted to be a botanist. This replaced florist and painter and cardiologist as her current vocational intention, and everyone had agreed to wait and see. She changes her mind every 3 months, Rachel said, at a Sunday dinner that had become a semi-regular fixture. She's building information, Lena said. When she has enough, she'll decide. Like someone else I know, Rachel said, with a look at her brother. I made a decision, Ethan said, without looking up from the pasta he was making, which was considerably better than it had been in June of the previous year because he had taken a lesson from someone who cooked the way Lena arranged flowers, with an attention to what the thing was for, not just what it was. It took you 8 months, Rachel said. It took me the right amount of time, he said. That's what I just said, Rachel said. It isn't, actually. It is, philosophically. Sophie looked at Lena across the table. Lena looked back. This particular kind of exchange between Ethan and Rachel happened regularly and required no intervention and resolved itself, and both of them had learned this through the accumulated evidence of several Sunday dinners. Can I tell you something? Sophie said, quieter, just to Lena. Yeah. I finished the painting at the new shop, Rick. She picked at the edge of the placemat. The left petal is wobbly. I know. It bothers me sometimes. Does it ruin the painting? Lena said. Sophie looked at the table, thought about it. No, she said. It's still good. It just has a wobbly part. Everything good has a wobbly part, Lena said. That's usually how you know it was made by a person and not a machine. Sophie looked at her. Is that a flower thing? It's a everything thing, Lena said. But flowers too. Sophie nodded, filed it in whatever internal system she used for information worth keeping. Across the kitchen, Ethan added something to the pasta sauce, and it smelled right in a way it hadn't always smelled right. And Rachel was saying something that made him almost smile the way he almost smiled. And outside the kitchen window, the September light was the same particular gold it had been a year ago in the courtyard garden. Long and unhurried, the light of a season that had said everything it needed to say and was now just sitting with it. The clay pot was in the kitchen now, off the desk, out of the office. It lived on the windowsill above the sink, where the morning light came through every day and the gold seams caught it the way they always had, honest, present, fully itself. Sophie had asked to move it there in the spring. She'd said the office was for work and the kitchen was for family and the pot was family. Nobody had argued with that. Lena stood in the kitchen of the apartment on the 32nd floor with the people who had become the shape of her life, and she looked at the pot on the windowsill and thought about a November morning and a wrong floor, and a man sitting in the middle of his large and powerful life, holding the pieces of something small, and about the particular quality of a first conversation that neither of them had planned and both of them had needed. She thought about what her mother would say, and she thought she knew. Flowers are worth the trouble. People are worth the trouble. She had taken the long route. She had been careful and then not careful and then careful again and then finally honest, which was the only route to anywhere worth arriving at. She was here. The dinner was ready. Sophie had already moved to the table. Rachel was still making her philosophical argument, losing it and not caring. Ethan turned from the stove and looked across the kitchen at Lena with the full unmanaged version of his attention. The one she'd been given access to slowly, over many months, in studios and back rooms and wrong-floor offices and all the ordinary moments that turned out to be the substance of an extraordinary thing. "Come sit down," he said. She sat down, and the life they had built, imperfect and real, cracked in places and gold in the cracks, made of everything they had brought through and everything they had found on the other side of bringing it through, continued the way things continue when they are worth continuing. Not because they were fixed, because they had decided eventually to be repaired.